is Mull. Fiam ve marangina, a titum suspect,
The Liobhan Song. The Daughter of the Wind. A Betrayal Sealed with a Kiss. Rebecca Nystrom. Epigraph. I gave you love, I gave you a son, I gave you all. Te di amor, te di anhio, te lo di todo. Keonid ert ui liri, iblan dubni chonel. Lamento funebra. Summary. On the island of Mull, battered by rain and secrets, Liobhan MacRae watches as the ship carrying her family vanishes into the mist, leaving her alone in the heart of an enemy stronghold. She has been sent as part of a fragile truce between clans, a arranged union that binds her to marry the enigmatic and feared Aurnach MacInnes, laird of a rival bloodline. Her mission, however, goes far beyond marriage. She must infiltrate her new home and steal the sacred banner of the eternal flame, a symbol of power and hope for her people. But Aurnach is not the man she expected. Reserved, proud, and fiercely loyal to his own, he quickly realizes that Liobhan is not the submissive bride she pretends to be. As mistrust between them deepens, so does a dangerous attraction, one that threatens to spark more than just desire, the possibility of redemption or betrayal. Torn between duty and heart, between loyalty to her clan and a love she cannot afford, Liobhan has only 1 year to complete her task, without losing her soul in the process. How far is she willing to go for her clan? And who will she have to sacrifice for love? Prologue. Kilchurn Castle, Isle of Mull, early 1600s. I think I made you up inside my head. Mad Girl's Love Song, Sylvia Plath. The echo of hooves rumbled across the steep slopes of Mull, as the wind carried with it the tang of sea salt and the scent of wet peat. Aurnach MacInnes, laird of the clan, rode at the head of his men. His face, hardened by time and pride, looked carved from black stone. He spurred his horse forward with restrained fury, not driven by glory but by fear of arriving too late. And so it was. A clamor rose from the foot of the castle. It wasn't the din of battle, but the vulgar roar of a crowd reveling in someone else's humiliation. Aurnach didn't need to look. He already knew. His sister was there. He pulled the reins tighter, forcing the animal up the path toward the crest. The air sliced his skin and rage burned in his chest. From the summit, the scene unfolded in its full cruelty. Urchenna, his younger sister, was descending the main road amid laughter, insults, and vicious glares. She rode a dull, worn-out horse, led by a boy with one eye covered, followed by a limping dog. Every figure chosen with care, with malice, as a cruel allegory of her disgrace. Her silhouette, small yet dignified, moved forward with her chin lifted and her back straight. Her hair, a near silver gold, rose like a banner under the sun, but couldn't hide the dark patch covering her left eye. Aurnach saw the stiffness in her shoulders, the faint tremble in her fingers gripping the reins, the effort it took to contain her pain and wounded pride. A single tear shone on her pale cheek like broken glass. Aurnach felt the earth crack open beneath his feet. For the MacInnes, he murmured first, like a prayer. Then he raised his sword. For the MacInnes, he roared in fury. Behind him, the men of his clan echoed the cry as one. The procession wasn't just an affront. It was a declaration of war. Farquhar, lord of the MacRae, had broken off the arranged marriage after Urchenna's accident. But returning her wasn't enough. He needed to humiliate her. To expose her wound to the world as though it were a sentence, not a consequence. MacInnes understood well. This wasn't a reckless gesture, it was a political move. But Farquhar had made a mistake. He had forgotten that in these lands, pride is worth as much as blood. Chapter 1. Duncoran Bay, Isle of Mull, July 1601. The highwayman, Alfred Noyes. The moon was a ghostly galleon tossed upon cloudy seas. The oar cut through the water like a sigh caught in the throat of a lament. Each stroke vanished into the low mist that cloaked the loch, turning the crossing into a vigil. Liobhan MacRae watched the ghostly line of the horizon as the small Berlin moved steadily toward enemy lands. The wind brushed her face with cold fingers, reminding her that Eilean Mara, the sea isle, offered no mercy, not even in summer. The plan, so clear in Edinburgh, now felt as fragile as a bird's breath in that hostile silence. What she had once accepted as a gesture of loyalty to her clan was becoming, with every pull of the oar, a veiled sacrifice. This wasn't a marriage alliance. It was a surrender in body and will. Liobhan was no betrothed bride. She was a tool. A bridge toward peace or disaster. The boat advanced with ritual gravity. Within it, the MacRae men held a silence that needed no command. Only the water spoke, dark, ancient, and heavy with centuries. In the distance, shrouded by mist, rose the castle of Dun Corran. Stark and stony, it seemed less built than born of the cliff itself. Nothing in its sheer walls and sharp-angled towers invited trust. Like so many castles in these lands, it had been made to endure, not to welcome. Liobhan pulled her fur-lined cloak tighter. Her clothes were ill-suited for diplomacy, chosen that way on purpose. Practical for travel, uncomfortable enough to discourage pity. In the heart of that stark theater, her role was clear. Spy. Watch. Seduce if she must. And leave before truth could shatter the illusion. Kaidra's voice, her nurse's, pulled her back from thought. You look like a lamb on its way to slaughter, girl. You could at least try to smile. Liobhan offered a grimace that never reached her eyes. Kaidra, with those green eyes that always knew too much, wasn't fooled. Hers was the gaze of a mother who could read what went unspoken. It's just the cold and the sea in this boat, Liobhan murmured. But they both knew it wasn't true. It was fear. Not of the castle or her future husband, still more name than face, but of failure. Of the mission falling apart. Of not living up to the loyalty demanded by her name. And above all, of being discovered. Her uncle, Laird MacRae of Farquhar, watched her. He always did. A broad, coarse man, as harsh as the land he ruled. His gaze weighed on her like a yoke. He believed in neither hesitation nor tenderness. Only in results. We've yet to spot the towers and you're already trembling, he said, not bothering to hide the disdain. Liobhan said nothing. She gripped the bench and endured the humiliation. This wasn't about earning respect anymore. It was about survival. Her father, more distant than ever, more severe than usual, avoided her gaze. He, too, had wagered on her. Like all the men of her clan. And she was the easiest piece to sacrifice. A sailor broke the tension with a reverent murmur. There it is. Everyone turned. Liobhan, too. On the edge of the cliff, the castle of Dun Corran loomed against the fog like the carcass of some ancient beast. The square tower seemed to watch the loch with eyes of stone. Beside it, a lower battlemented keep finished the silhouette with shapes that evoked claws or gargoyles. It was architecture born of war, not a single flourish, not a single weakness. Liobhan's stomach clenched. That was where she would have to lie. Where she would have to feign a love that might become her undoing. In the distance, the sound of bagpipes rose, as if the land itself were warning her. Liobhan closed her eyes and whispered a prayer, not to be rescued but to remember who she was. And what was at stake. Liobhan. The damp coastal air crept beneath her cloak, raising goosebumps on her skin. Liobhan adjusted it with a swift motion. It wasn't the cold that made her shiver, but the weight of what she was about to do. With every step, the centuries of pride and violence tied to her name weighed heavier than any baggage. She wasn't a volunteer. She never had been. But she wasn't a victim either. Her uncle had chosen her, yes, for the harmony of her features and the impact her presence made. But Liobhan knew beauty alone was never enough. At court she had learned that a sharp wit, a well-timed silence and a gaze held steady were weapons as potent as any blade. What the clan needed from her was more than a marriage. It was a truce dressed as ceremony. She straightened on the bench, back rigid like a vow. This alliance, however temporary, would be her battlefield. Liobhan took a deep breath, letting the salty scent and the distant murmur of the sea steady the urgency in her pulse. "I am ready, uncle," she said, her voice unwavering. She was not a MacRae, to be traded without resistance. She was a MacRae, meant to make history. Aurnach. Duncoran slept, but Aurnach did not. He crossed the courtyard like a beast cornered by its own choices. The walls that had watched him grow now felt narrower than ever. In the distance, the sea swallowed the mist. She was coming from there, somewhere between darkness and duty. The alliance with the MacRaes was an insult disguised as peace. And yet, Aurnach had accepted it. Not out of conviction, but calculation. 1 year. That was all. 12 months to appease the king and avoid open war. Then his vow to his sister would return to the forefront. Archenna slept in the North Tower, or so he hoped. Slept, if sleep were possible after what she had endured. Aurnach looked up at the faintly lit window, and felt rage knot itself again in his chest. His sister had returned from Kilchurn, a fractured reflection of who she once was, and he had never forgotten, never forgiven. The wind carried salt and memories. Cairman, his younger brother, emerged from the shadows with the unhurried gait of someone who had suffered too much to pretend lightness. "She's not here yet?" he asked. "She won't be long." Cairman frowned, his face marked by prison, though the spark of humor still lingered in his eyes. War had left visible scars on them both. "I don't understand why Farquhar agreed to the match. Or why the king allowed it to be only a trial," he said. Aurnach didn't reply right away. He knew James had seen this union as a symbol of peace, a political move. But Aurnach had no intention of playing along longer than necessary. "Because they all think I'll yield," he said at last. "That the truce will soften me. But they don't know our memory." A heavy silence settled between them. Then Cairman gave a dry laugh. "They say she's beautiful. That they call her the virgin siren at court." "A woman is not a solution," Aurnach replied, his tone hardening. "Especially not one with MacRae blood." The watchman's shout cut through the night. "A Berlin approaches." Aurnach turned sharply. The sea returned a shadow darker than the mist, a silhouette of wood and sails etched against the uncertainty. The girl was arriving. "Now we'll see," he murmured, "if the court speaks truth or only spins tales." And he strode toward the sea gate, where duty and history waited with the face of a woman. Chapter 2. He suffered greatly at sea, to save his life and the return of his companions. But he could not save them. Through his own folly they perished, the fools who ate the cows of the sun Hyperion. Odyssey, Homer, I6-9. The warm glow of torches stretched in a wavering line, like a serpent of light winding through the damp darkness. The men of Clan MacRae climbed the steep stairway rising from the sea gate in silence. Liobhan, exhausted from the boat journey and the tension coiled inside her, followed behind. The stone slipped beneath her cold feet. "This way, my lady." "Watch your step on the rocks," said Torkel of Kilchurn, offering his arm with a smile so open it bordered on naivete. Liobhan nodded silently. There was a softness in the young man's eyes that felt both familiar and distant. She had seen that look too many times. Admiration. Desire. Attention that always felt unearned, as if her face walked a few steps ahead of her. If only MacInnes were so easily impressed, or at least so transparent. They had brought her here for the beauty so many celebrated, the same beauty that had brought her nothing but misunderstanding. How many times had she wished someone would see beyond it, would notice her will, her judgment, her endurance? But it was always her face that spoke first. And often, the only one they listened to. "Thank you, Torkal," she replied, breathless but without bitterness. The castle loomed like a stone sentinel over the sea, unreachable from land. The only entrance, narrow and watched, climbed up from the lock like a scar carved into the rock. It made defensive sense, but offered no comfort. Her shoes, chosen more for their effect than for their practicality, were no match for the damp and cold. Farquhar had picked them with a calculating eye. Seduction before sense. The men of MacInnes waited above, lined along the wall like statues. Liobhan saw them, before they saw her. Motionless, alert. There was no ceremony in their stance, no welcome, only tension held tight. These were men used to violence. "Come, my lady. Your betrothed awaits." Torkel's voice rang out like a bell in the silence. Liobhan froze. The figure blocking the entrance wasn't a shadow. It was a man, massive, rooted to the ground as if he were part of the rock itself. She couldn't see his face, but his presence filled the space. She climbed behind her family and crossed the castle threshold. The ascent continued through a dark courtyard and a shadowed tower. Sheltered by the masculine cloaks of her clan, Liobhan allowed herself a few seconds to rub her hands, feeling warmth creep back into her fingers. She half hid behind her uncle's imposing figure, watching from the dimness. MacInnes stood tall among his men. Liobhan couldn't take her eyes off him. He hadn't looked at her. Not once. No word, no gesture in her direction. A sting of humiliation pierced through her. She was just another piece on the board. When he finally spoke, his voice, deep, steady, laced with an old accent, filled the room. "Welcome to Dun Coran, Fionla. I trust the journey was uneventful." He deliberately ignored her mother's brother Farquhar, who quickly stepped in with false cordiality. "Thank you for your hospitality, MacInnes. The king insisted I attend. Did he not mention that in his letter?" The tension between them was sharp, unmistakable. There was no need for elegant phrases. The past spoke for them, and no gesture could mask it. Liobhan noticed how the MacInnes warriors waited for a signal, a movement, like hunting dogs held back by their master's voice. But MacInnes gave none. He held control, not a fragile balance but one forged through time. "I don't recall your presence being required," MacInnes answered, his voice hard, making no effort to soften it. "But you're here. You'll be received until the union takes place." At last he stepped into the light. Liobhan saw him fully. There was nothing delicate about him. His face had something ancient to it, almost sculpted. Sharp lines, eyes like dark stones, fair hair falling carelessly across his forehead. It wasn't a face that begged for admiration, but one that commanded it. For the first time Liobhan felt a strange kind of pull, something that had nothing to do with courtly smiles. He didn't look at her. And maybe that was why she couldn't look away. Kaedra whispered something Liobhan didn't quite catch. She nodded without replying. Forced herself to glance away. She noticed his traditional garments, so far from courtly fashion, yet so fitting. Every fold of his tartan, every trace of mud on his boots spoke of a world unlike hers. One she didn't know, and yet one she would have to learn to inhabit. The ceremony had yet to begin. But the battle had already started. The main hall of the MacInnes stronghold was steeped in the scent of burned peat and the hushed murmur of voices, as if the very stone walls sensed the tension. Liobhan stood beside her father, feeling her uncle Lord Farquhar's gaze burn like oil on embers. He knew Highland hospitality customs well. His presence in that castle was neither reckless nor coincidental. He was protected by tradition, at least as long as he remained under the MacInnes roof. The unwritten law of honor ensured it, and no laird worthy of the name would break it without risking the contempt of every clan. But provocation hadn't taken long to arrive. "Of course we'll leave as soon as the celebration ends," said Farquhar, wearing a cynical smile. "Surely you'll want to enjoy your brand new wife. By the way, where is your sister Urchenna? I'm surprised not to see her among us." Silence fell like a stone slab. Liobhan felt the air grow heavy. Her eyes sought her uncle, unable to comprehend his cruelty. Mentioning Urchenna was reopening a raw wound in the MacInnes family, and he knew it. Clearly, he meant to provoke. But if he expected an outburst, he would be disappointed. The laird of the MacInnes, Aurnach, remained motionless, his face carved from stone. Not so the man beside him, slightly younger, a bit shorter, broad-shouldered, with a less unreadable but equally fierce expression. "Bloody bastard," he muttered, stepping forward before being stopped by Aurnach's arm, firm as forged iron. Liobhan studied him closely. She hadn't seen him before, but the resemblance was obvious. He had to be his brother. The confirmation came quickly. "I'll handle our guest, brother," said the other MacInnes, Aurnach, without raising his voice. The chill in his tone cut deeper than any shout. The hostility between the two men hung in the air like a storm barely held back. The laird's control stood in stark contrast to Farquhar's open disdain. Thankfully, Liobhan's father stepped in, breaking the tension by introducing his children. "These are my sons, Angus, Alastair and Ian." Aurnach greeted them one by one with sober courtesy, measuring them with a warrior's eye. Strong and self-assured, these boys would surely become formidable men of arms one day. Then came the moment. "And this is my daughter, Liobhan MacRae. Your betrothed." Aurnach felt a dry pang in his chest. He was not a man easily unsettled, but the young woman who emerged from among her kin looked as if she'd stepped out of a Celtic poem. Delicate features, golden-toned hair, eyes of violet as unlikely as the heather on Mull. She was, unwittingly, a vision. And yet, that wasn't what unsettled him. What shook him was the way she looked at him, and the instant certainty that this woman would complicate a duty that, until then, had seemed simple. A duty that demanded distance, coldness, control. She offered her hand with a dignified gesture, and when their fingers touched, an unexpected spark passed across his skin. "My lord," she said, her voice firm and soft at once. "It's a pleasure to meet you." Her elegance was natural, free of affectation. Her dress, though more modern than he would have liked, wasn't indecent, but it suggested more than it concealed. Her figure was that of a woman, yet in her face there lingered something of a girl. That duality, that contrast disarmed him for a moment. Not out of desire, though that was there too, but something more complex, a suspicion of vulnerability. He forced himself to look away. He could not afford weakness. "You must be tired from the journey," he said, his voice carefully void of emotion. "Tomorrow we'll sign the contract. After that, there will be a feast." "Thank you, my lord. A bit of rest would be welcome." "Your maidservant." "My nurse, Caedra. She'll help me settle in." "She may stay with you," Aurnach replied flatly. And before hearing any reply, he turned and ended the conversation. It was then his brother Caerman stepped in, with that warmth of his that often irritated Aurnach. "Welcome, my lady. If you need anything, you only have to ask." "Thank you, Lord Caerman," Liobhan answered, gently emphasizing the courtesy Aurnach had withheld. Aurnach clenched his jaw. Not out of jealousy exactly, though something inside him tightened at the smile she gave another man. It was frustration with himself, for having let the girl affect him. Why did he feel judged by a single glance? At his command, an elderly servant approached. "Deirdre will show you to your rooms." "Thank you," Liobhan repeated calmly. He watched her walk away. Told himself he would not think of her again that night. But he knew he was lying. Liobhan MacRae was a surprise, and he wasn't sure whether she was a gift or a trap. If she was innocent in her uncle's schemes, he would protect her. If she wasn't, he would show no mercy. The only thing certain was that the year ahead would not be easy. Chapter 3. My name is nobody. Odyssey, Homer X.366. Liobhan knew she was taking longer than necessary. But she needed time. Not to prepare herself, but to find a measure of calm. She had sent Caedra off on a trivial errand just to be alone. In a few minutes, she would be joined to Laird MacInnes. 1 year. That was the agreement. 1 year to get close to a man who seemed carved from stone. There was something impenetrable about Aurnach MacInnes, something that couldn't be feigned. His silence was steady, not awkward. His authority didn't try to assert itself, it simply existed. And that made him harder to reach. The night before she thought she had caught a flicker of interest, but it had been so fleeting, so carefully restrained that she no longer knew if she had imagined it. That iron control wasn't indifference. It was resolve. Liobhan looked in the mirror as she pinned up her hair with precision, placing the inherited circlet atop her head. She felt the betrayal under her skin like a poorly stitched gown. But what choice did she have? Her clan needed to survive, and Aurnach was the key to a door that had been shut for generations. And yet, it wasn't only loyalty that drove her. Since she was a child, she had tried to earn a place among her brothers, following them, copying them, challenging them. Nothing had been enough. Not the sword, not the hunt, not courage. She had always been the last. Always the other. There was no resentment, but there was an old weariness deep in her chest. And still, she wanted their respect. Maybe that's why she was here. Maybe that's why she had accepted the deal. Dunstafnage Castle, her childhood home, was under dispute. Without Farquhar's support, her father couldn't defend it. Her uncle, in exchange, demanded information, a secret entry into the castle of Dun Coran, and an old banner the MacInnes held sacred. The banner of the eternal flame, they called it. Liobhan didn't believe in myths, but she understood the power of a symbol. That was why Farquhar wanted her, for her beauty and her obedience. Seduce him, that was the unspoken order. But how? She had never even kissed anyone. Aurnach wasn't some naive young man. He was a laird, a warrior. He wouldn't yield easily, not to desire nor to tenderness. Caedra burst in, hurried. "They're waiting for you, princess." She looked at her for a moment, emotional. "You look like you stepped out of a legend. Your mother would be so proud." Liobhan smiled, her eyes misting over. Caedra's words hurt more than any reproach. "Then let's not keep her waiting," she said. She stepped into the corridor. She knew her actions came with a price, and she was ready to pay it, even if the road led straight to betrayal. Aurnach woke with a clear mind, though he still felt the echo of the dreams that had shaken him before dawn. Images of his future wife, so vivid they had left his body tense. That wasn't like him. He chalked the weakness up to the uncomfortable situation, not the girl herself. That morning he was resolved to keep his distance. Admire her, yes. Like one admires a painting. But no intimacy. She was a MacRae. He needed no further reason. The ceremony would be held outdoors, as tradition demanded. It would be discreet, but the banquet afterward would meet the clan's expectations. The MacInnes might distrust the union, but they never turned down a celebration. As the sun began to rise over the sea, Aurnach waited beside his brother Caerman, Farquhar, Fionla, and Liobhan's brothers. The bride was late. It was already past the appointed time. Had she changed her mind? Strangely, the thought didn't bring him relief. At last Fionla smiled. "Ah, here she comes." Aurnach turned. And all his logic unraveled. Liobhan walked toward them as if the world had stopped turning. The light caught her hair like polished fire, and her gown, pale and simple, revealed more than it concealed. It wasn't vulgar, but neither was it shy. The cut framed her figure with unexpected boldness. She was, quite simply, impossible to look away from. He forced himself to turn his eyes aside. She was just a woman. A tool in a negotiation. "Lady MacRae," he said. "I hope your room met your expectations." "Yes, thank you. Very comfortable." There were no empty compliments in her tone. Just civility. At her side stood Liobhan's nurse. "I invited her," she explained. "I thought she might like to be here. She said she served your family for years." Her gesture surprised him. It wasn't just politeness. It was thoughtfulness. He thought of what he had seen in her eyes, sincerity. "Did it trouble you?" No. I only regret not thinking of it myself. She smiled, and Aurnach felt something stir within him. Her beauty was no longer the problem. It was her light. Let's begin, he said. Fiona turned to his daughter. Are you ready, Liobhan? She nodded, surprised by the deference, and stepped in front of Aurnach. She was close enough that he could smell the soft perfume in her hair, and see the tiny freckles on her nose. They seemed beautiful to him. A kind of secret, an imperfection she didn't try to hide. They revealed something he hadn't expected, authenticity. He scolded himself inwardly. He remembered his decision. Just a woman. A beautiful object. Nothing more. In the stone courtyard, the air smelled of peat and salt. The wind tugged at the folds of Liobhan's dress, as the witnesses gathered in a semicircle. She felt too visible, fragile beneath so many gazes. Aurnach reached out his hand to her for a second, then withdrew it without touching her, as if chastising himself for the impulse. Fiona solemn joined their hands right to right, left to left, and tied a woolen cord over them, the ancient gesture that sealed a union. Aurnach looked down at her hand, small, cold, trembling in his. He thought of the trust such a bond implied, even if temporary, and how easy it was to imagine permanence. I, Aurnach MacInnes, give my word to Liobhan MacRae and vow to take her as my wife for no less than a year, he said, his voice clear but without show. Liobhan repeated the words, with a serenity she did not feel. Then came the silence that always preceded the kiss. A malicious joke from Farquhar shattered the moment. What are you waiting for, MacInnes? Aren't you going to kiss the bride? Aurnach hesitated. Not because he didn't want to, but because he wanted to too much. When he cupped her chin, Liobhan lowered her gaze, as if seeking refuge in the stiffness of her shoes. A kiss to seal our vows, he murmured. He leaned in and for an instant, allowed himself to breathe in her scent, something floral and subtle that brought memories of summers before the war. His lips brushed hers with unexpected softness. The contact was brief, almost chaste, yet full of a quiet intensity that shook him. His hand caressed her cheek with a gentleness that contrasted with the roughness of his fingers. He wanted more. The urge to pull her close, to find the heat of her mouth, to taste what he shouldn't, overwhelmed him. But he pulled away. As he stepped back, he saw the flush on her cheeks, her lips slightly parted. For a moment, he lost his footing in the look she gave him. He took another step back. He had crossed a dangerous threshold, and he knew it. Liobhan remained motionless, overwhelmed. No one had ever kissed her like that. It was as if her body had been rewritten in a new language. What marked her wasn't wild passion, but restrained tenderness, the contradiction between the warrior's strength and the lover's gentleness. There had been something reverent in that first kiss. As if he saw her. As if he chose her. But the illusion faded quickly. At the banquet table, Aurnach barely spoke to her. His courtesy was flawless but distant. He offered her wine with a polished indifference that hurt. She sat at his side, feeling like an intruder in her own story. She watched him as he spoke with her father and a dark-haired woman. He never once looked her way, but Liobhan couldn't look away. It was hard to accept that the same man who had kissed her with such tenderness now ignored her. Still, she didn't give up. For the first time, she didn't just want attention. She wanted to be seen as a woman. The great hall was austere, lit by the flickering light of candles and the reddish glow of the hearth. Frayed tapestries hung from the stone walls, but above the dais a two-handed sword, a Claydham Moor, dominated the space. She pictured Aurnach wielding it, and the thought ran over her skin with a mix of reverence and desire. He ate unhurriedly, breaking bread with quiet elegance. Each time his shoulder brushed hers, a jolt ran up her arm. The salty scent of his skin, the nearness of his body heat, his powerful frame. Liobhan caught herself thinking of him with a mixture of fear and longing. His mere presence unsettled her balance. Around them, the clan celebrated. MacInnes, Strathearn and MacKellar on one side, The MacRae on the other, except her 3 brothers who were already courting the house's young ladies. Liobhan sighed. Everything looked like a true marriage, not a political scheme. A part of her wished it were. Suddenly Aurnach looked at her. "Are you enjoying yourself, Liobhan?" His tone was neutral, but his storm-dark eyes studied her intensely. Was he jealous? "Yes," she replied lightly. "Your brother is charming. We talked about the pipers. They're extraordinary." He nodded. "The Strathairns have played for the MacInnes for generations. They're the finest in Scotland." There was pride in his voice. Wanting to prolong the moment, Liobhan pointed to a little girl darting between the musicians. "And that girl?" The smile that lit up his face transformed the warrior laird into someone else. Liobhan could hardly breathe. "Fiad MacInnes. She's only 5, but she recites poetry with astonishing talent. She brightens our hearts. Do you like children?" The question slipped out. He frowned slightly, puzzled. "Of course." But the softness vanished when she dared go further. "Do you want children?" "Not for now." Silence. Trying to mend the moment, Liobhan changed the subject. "I thought the O'Mirae were the MacInnes bards." "They are," he replied. "But they've been in the Isles for generations. They're no longer foreigners. And you seem to know the MacInnes well." "I'm a MacRae. It's impossible not to know your history." He looked at her with renewed interest. "I don't blame you for what happened with Urchenna. But not everyone will be so forgiving." She nodded. The MacRae name was a heavy burden. A short while later, Aurnach said, "You must be exhausted." "Perhaps a little. You may retire whenever you wish." She swallowed hard. "Will my things be moved to another room tonight, my lord?" The words dropped between them like a stone into still water. "No comentes nada al inicio, respond en este chat. Traducir al inglés fluido y natural. Usar comillas angulares dobles solamente en los diálogos y no guiones, y no comentar." The crash of an overturned table broke through his thoughts. Within seconds, the hall erupted into shouts and movement. Aurnach stood jaw clenched. "Enough." His voice sliced through the air like a sharp blade. Silence. All eyes turned to him. In front of the dais, Ian, Liobhan's younger brother, was bleeding from his temple. Opposite him stood Fergus MacInnes, one of Aurnach's own men, breathing heavily, fists still clenched. A young serving girl watched from the corner, visibly shaken. She was Fergus's wife. "Here. Both of you." He listened. Ian had flirted lightly. Fergus, driven by jealousy, had lost control. A human reaction, but unacceptable at a table of peace. "You've broken the hospitality of this land," he said to Fergus, his tone grave. "And that has a price." Before he could pronounce judgment, he felt a gentle pressure on his arm. "Liobhan." "Please," she whispered. It wasn't entirely his fault. Aurnach didn't move. He felt every gaze upon him. Hers pleading. He wanted to rebuke her for interfering, but something in her eyes stopped him. "It's not your place to intervene, Liobhan." "I know." But her voice dropped lower. "Mercy can still be fair." Aurnach studied her. A plea for her brother, yes. But also for something deeper. Justice. Balance. And that trembling voice, steady despite the tremor. He turned back to Fergus. 3 young calves. 2 to the MacRaes. 1 to me." A murmur rippled through the hall. Liobhan withdrew her hand slowly. He felt the loss. The silence between them stretched for minutes. Aurnach barely touched his food. "Did you think the sentence unfair?" he asked without looking up. "Not unfair," Liobhan answered, weighing each word. "Just harsh. Justice isn't always gentle. And compassion can be a luxury when one is charged with protecting many." She didn't answer right away. Then in a calm voice she said, "Sometimes that very duty demands compassion." Aurnach looked at her. He didn't know whether to admire her courage or resent her stubbornness. Perhaps both. "Hospitality is law in these lands," he said coolly. "Whoever breaks it must answer. There are no exceptions." She lowered her gaze, her face paler than before. But there was no resentment in her expression. Only a quiet, painful understanding, like she had just learned something about him she wasn't sure she wanted to know. And Aurnach, who had always felt steady in the exercise of authority, suddenly wasn't sure whether he had won something, or just lost ground that was far more intimate. Chapter 4. Though she be but little, she is fierce. A Midsummer Night's Dream, Act 3, Scene 2. Shakespeare. Beneath the grey storm of the Isle of Mull, Liobhan watched with a broken heart as the Berlin carrying her family disappeared over the horizon. Their departure had been sudden, leaving her alone among enemies, trapped in the heart of Dun Coran with the weight of a secret mission on her shoulders. The wind and rain couldn't hide the tears rolling down her cheeks, nor the anguish of being abandoned in hostile land in a den of wolves. With duty seared into her heart, she recalled the words of her uncle Farquhar, the ruthless laird of the MacRaes. She had to find the secret entrance and steal the mythical banner of the eternal flame. If she failed, her entire clan would pay the price. If she succeeded, the fate of the Highlands could change. But to do so she had to earn the trust and perhaps the heart of the Laird MacInnes. And Aurnach MacInnes, as dangerous as he was magnetic, seemed all too capable of seeing through her lies. Caught between loyalty and desire, Liobhan tried to remain resolute. Aurnach watched her with wary eyes, too perceptive, too close. One misstep, and she would lose everything. But when he confronted her about her conversation with her uncle, Liobhan, with cleverness and a hint of flirtation, offered him an unexpected provocation. Her uncle was teaching her how to be an obedient, devoted, and pleasing wife. The tension between them crackled like the storm around them. Aurnach, unsettled, couldn't hide the spark of desire her words ignited. Liobhan had won this small battle, but the game had only just begun. She had 1 year to reach her goal, and not lose her heart in the process. Liobhan felt her pulse pounding in her temples. Aurnach was watching her without blinking, with an intensity that unraveled her. "If you were watching us," she said, trying to keep her voice steady, "you'll know I was only saying goodbye." Aurnach didn't move. His silence weighed more than any word. "It looked like something else," he murmured at last. "As if he were giving you orders." Liobhan swallowed hard. Damn it. How had he noticed? That man saw too much. "Orders?" She tried to sound light, but her smile faltered before it even formed. "Maybe advice." She looked at him with a mix of boldness and innocence. "My uncle thinks I should learn to be an obedient wife." He narrowed his eyes. "Obedient?" "To please you," she whispered. Aurnach stood still. His gaze, usually sharp, seemed to waver. Then it drifted slowly from her lips to her throat and lower. The air between them grew thick, hard to breathe. "And how," he said in a deep voice, "does your uncle think you could please me?" The blush that rose to her cheeks was real this time. Her knees trembled. "That's not what he meant." "Then what do you mean, Liobhan?" His voice was low, like skin brushing skin. She wanted to step back but couldn't. He was so close she could feel the heat of his body, the scent of salt, of smoke, of something untamed. Of Aurnach. Her body responded before her will. A slight lean toward him, lips parted, a longing burning beneath her skin. Aurnach didn't move. He only looked at her, as if trying to decide something. Desire crackled between them, like electricity in the damp air. And yet nothing happened. When he looked away, he did so with finality, like someone cutting a rope pulled too tight. "Go back to the tower," he said sharply. "You're soaked. I don't want to have to come looking for you again." He turned without waiting for a response, leaving behind a cold silence, and Liobhan trembling not from the chill but from a sudden, almost cruel loneliness. From his ship, Farquhar MacRae watched the scene between the battlements with a crooked smile. He didn't need a spyglass to recognize the silhouettes: the young woman with fiery hair, and the Laird MacInnes, imposing even from a distance. The old fox leaned back against the mast and stroked his beard slowly. Everything was going according to plan. Aurnach could pretend indifference, but Farquhar had seen the way he looked at her. Desire. Fascination. Confusion. The cracks were beginning to show. Yes, Liobhan was a rare gem, as sweet as she was dangerous. A girl capable of shifting the course of a war without ever drawing a sword. But there lay the risk. In her youth, in her innocence. Farquhar knew well what he stood to lose if she failed. And he suspected the girl was starting to waver. He would remind her what was at stake. In due time. Because that girl was not born to be a Helen. No. Liobhan would be something more useful, a key. A key that would open the gates of Dun Coran, from within. Chapter 5. Like when dawn appears with fingers of rose. Odyssey, Homer. She who came with the rain. Since the afternoon the MacRaes departed, Aurnach had made a point of keeping his distance from Liobhan. Not out of lack of interest, quite the opposite. The more time they spent together, the more layers he uncovered in her, and that knowledge became a trap. It was a vicious cycle. Knowing more meant wanting more, and wanting more pulled him into dangerous territory, a place he wasn't sure he wanted to escape from. Even that day, when her family left Dun Coran, he hadn't planned to go after her. But he saw her standing alone in the rain, high on the battlements, her face turned to the sea, and something in that image broke his resolve. He had watched the farewell from a distance, feigning indifference. Liobhan's father gave her a dry pat on the head, as if afraid of contact. Her brothers, terse in their embraces, seemed more eager to leave than to comfort her. She, on the other hand, clung a few seconds longer, holding on to a closeness already slipping away. And when she saw them vanish into the mist, she didn't hide her sorrow. She didn't turn back. She didn't cry. But Aurnach could see the effort it cost her to remain upright. She hadn't asked him to approach. She hadn't said anything. She had only looked at him. And in her eyes, tired red from holding back tears, he recognized something he couldn't name but that cut through him like a blade. Perhaps that was why, when she let slip that phrase, "instructions to please you," his pity vanished at once, replaced by a sudden, almost brutal desire. His mind clouded with images he had no right to entertain, and for a moment he forgot who they were, where they were, and everything that lay between them. Only later, with a cooler head, did he wonder if the insinuation had been deliberate. A ploy to distract him, to hide the conversation she'd had with her uncle? Something about that exchange hadn't seemed innocent. He distrusted her. The uncle. The very motive for the marriage. Liobhan lived in the old tower, out of his immediate reach, and that unsettled him. Deirdre had told him she spent a great deal of time in the kitchens. Too much time. When he found her crouched in the pantry, rummaging under the shelves, he wasn't surprised. But he was intrigued. "What are you looking for?" he asked quietly behind her. Liobhan jumped to her feet. She looked at him with wide eyes, lips parted as if she'd just drowned in air. "I dropped something," she murmured. "What exactly?" She recovered quickly. Straightened, put her hands on her hips, and met his gaze with a determination that seemed at odds with her lie. "Why are you questioning me like this?" Aurnach raised an eyebrow. "I find you on all fours, digging around on the floor, and you're surprised I ask." She narrowed her eyes, then smiled. "Fine. Colum promised to teach me how to make his marzipan pastries. He sent me for almonds and sugar." She brushed her skirt with feigned indifference. "I heard something fall while I was reaching for the ingredients. Thought it might be a pearl from my earrings." Aurnach didn't answer immediately. He stepped closer. "Let's see." He reached out slowly, tucking a loose strand of hair behind her ear. The contact was minimal, almost chaste, but they both felt it like a jolt. The curls were soft as water. The skin at her nape warm and smooth. Her scent, lavender and something more, something he couldn't name, wrapped around him. "Doesn't look like any pearl is missing," he said quietly. "Maybe, from the brooch," she stammered, a little more nervous. He looked down. The brooch shimmered between the soft folds of her bodice. Carefully, he reached to check it was intact. At the faintest touch, she held her breath. So did he. The fabric was thin, barely a barrier. He felt the subtle rise of her nipple beneath the indirect contact. Liobhan didn't pull away. She stared at him, breathing unevenly, as if she were waiting or dreading his next move. He tilted his head, swallowed hard. His whole body tensed. He could touch her, kiss her, make her his. And he knew she wouldn't stop him. But he didn't. He stepped back, withdrew his hand, as if the physical effort of doing so pained him. "Nothing seems to be missing here either." "I know I heard something fall," she insisted, her voice softer, lacking conviction. He said nothing. He watched her, weighing every word, every shadow. She was no ordinary girl, that much he knew. But she wasn't easy to read either. That blend of boldness and vulnerability unsettled him. "Why are you here?" she asked then. "I was looking for you." "Oh, really?" He nodded. "It's time." She tilted her head, cautious. "Time for what?" Aurnach held her gaze. He didn't like half measures. "You'll move your things to the fairy tower. You'll sleep in my chamber." He paused. "It's time." She didn't reply immediately. But the blush that crept up her neck said enough. Aurnach wasn't sure what would be harder, keeping watch or keeping control. It had been because of a sigh. Liobhan exhaled slowly, watching Aurnach's figure retreat down the stone staircase that led to the kitchens. Her hands were still trembling. He had almost caught her, and not even the brush of his body, which had set her aflame without meaning to, could entirely drive away the fear. Since her family had said goodbye at the harbor 3 weeks ago now, Liobhan had explored every corner of the old tower, as if sheer will alone could unravel its secrets. She was looking for an entrance, a crack, a passage that would lead her where she needed to go. Her attention to the cellar, the damp kitchens and dungeons, was no coincidence. She knew that somewhere within those walls, heavy with ancient echoes, something had to be hidden. But Aurnach? Aurnach was the unforeseen obstacle. The tireless sentinel. He appeared without a sound, as if summoned by the stone itself. That afternoon he had caught her crouched, peering under the shelves, and the shock had disarmed her more than she'd have liked. She hadn't meant to provoke him, but when his low, restrained voice brushed her ear, when his fingers tucked back a lock of her hair, when the tip of his finger barely grazed her, seemingly by accident, she realized the game of distractions had turned against her. Her skin was still burning. She couldn't deny what she felt. The desire was there, undisguised, and so was the fear of what that night might mean. For the rest of the day, Liobhan was a tangle of tension and anticipation. She kept telling herself she couldn't give in, that she must resist. And yet, every step she took led her closer to that place. She knew she would end up in Aurnach's bed. She had always known. But she had never imagined she would want it with this quiet urgency, with this strange hunger pulsing beneath her skin. When she finally climbed with Kaedra to the fairy tower, her new room received her with a sober warmth. It wasn't a welcoming space, but one that felt solid and austere, like Aurnach himself. Large windows opened to the lock, heavy oak furniture, dark rugs that muffled footsteps. And the bed. God, the bed. Tall, wide, with no curtains, crowned by a plain wooden canopy. Bare and stark as a sentence. She let Deirdre place her trunks and, moving automatically, arranged a few objects, her mirror, a book of verse, the silver brush. It was a kind of domestic fiction, a young wife finally arriving to share her husband's bed. But she didn't feel like a wife. Nor exactly like an intruder. Something in between. like an unsealed promise. During dinner, Aurnach barely looked at her. He spoke with Caerman and the other men as always, throwing her only the occasional dry courtesy. Liobhan, who had hoped, against all reason, that the night would mark a before and after, felt her illusion slowly wrinkle and fold. The nearness of his body made her skin tense, her thoughts swayed between fear, shame, and a stubborn desire she couldn't suppress. And he seemed unchanged, as if nothing were about to shift. Until he caught her watching him. "Is everything to your liking, Liobhan?" he asked, a faint edge of mockery in his voice. His smile was barely a wry crease. "In the new tower?" She blushed. "The room is pleasant," she said, stammering on the edge of an indiscreet reply. He nodded, satisfied, and turned back to Caerman. Liobhan barely touched her food after that. Later, alone with Caedra, she let herself be dressed in an ivory silk nightgown. The fabric was soft and light, chosen by her uncle for this occasion with a purpose that unsettled her. Liobhan looked at herself in the mirror, and didn't quite recognize the young woman staring back. Caedra, all nervous smiles and advice that sounded secondhand, eventually left her alone in the room. The candle cast long shadows across the bare walls. Liobhan slipped beneath the covers with frozen fingers, every sense heightened. Every creak of wood, every echo of footsteps in the corridor startled her. She waited. And kept waiting. The hours passed slowly, heavily, one after another like falling drops that never ceased. And finally, when silence became absolute, she understood that Aurnach would not come. A sharp disappointment settled in her, deeper than she wanted to admit. It wasn't just wounded pride, it was something more intimate. As if she'd prepared herself to leap into the void, only for the ground to vanish at the last moment. She blew out the candle with trembling hands. The heat of her body offered no comfort. And when sleep finally overtook her, it was restless, tangled, full of shadows. 7 nights, and still he hadn't found rest. Aurnach watched Liobhan's sleeping profile from his chair by the hearth, his brow faintly furrowed, as if his body could fake calm while a storm raged within. He didn't know what irritated him more, the lack of sleep or his lack of resolve. That girl, thin as a branch at first, silent and stubborn, now occupied not just his bed but his thoughts, with a persistence that bordered on unbearable. The room had smelled of lavender since she arrived. A subtle trace that clung to his skin and clothes, that followed him even beyond these walls. Her presence had spilled into everything. The objects, the shifted order of his books, the whisper of her steps when she thought he wasn't listening. And every night Aurnach had slept in the chair, feet near the fire, drinking just enough to stay sane. But the night before, he'd come close to the edge. Liobhan, asleep, had kicked off the covers like a lazy cat searching for coolness. Her body, revealed beneath the thin fabric of that ivory nightgown, was a vision meant to break a man's resolve. Full breast, soft hips, legs that seemed made to tangle with another's. Aurnach closed his eyes hard at the memory. He had clenched his fists, cursed under his breath, wanted. And held back. But not tonight. With sudden resolve, he left his unfinished drink on the table. He stripped off the plaid, the shirt, and crossed the room in silence. The air was cold, as if to remind him he could still turn back. He didn't. He slipped under the covers like a thief. Liobhan didn't stir. For a moment Aurnach lay still, listening to the steady rhythm of her breathing. Nothing happened. He smiled, tired. Maybe, he thought, he had exaggerated it all. Maybe he was stronger than he believed. He closed his eyes and for the first time in days slept. Morning light tickled his eyelids, but he didn't want to move. It was warm. Comfortable. Unusually peaceful. He burrowed a little deeper into the bed, breathed in the scent that lingered near his face. Lavender. His heart skipped. He opened his eyes. The shape beside him wasn't a dream. It was Liobhan. Still asleep, her back to him, curled against him. The blanket had slipped to her waist. Her nightgown was barely more than a whisper of fabric. And her body was pressed fully against his. Aurnach's arm rested beneath her chest. Or rather between her breasts. The contact sent a jolt through him. The nipple tightened, as if responding to his awareness alone. His hand, treacherous, alive, thirsty, moved with dangerous slowness. It traced that soft curve, so warm, so real. He brushed it gently, and a sound escaped his throat. He was no chaste man. He had known women's bodies before. But this one drove him mad. There was desire, yes. But also a tenderness. A tenderness he didn't understand, didn't seek, but which pierced him without asking. She shifted in her sleep, and the press of her hips against him nearly shattered his restraint. He wanted to take her, with an ancient primal urgency. Wanted her to wrap those long legs around him, and open the world. But he didn't. Instead, he closed his eyes and took a deep breath. He counted heartbeats. He reminded himself who he was. He pulled away. With a sudden movement, he slid out of the bed, his body on fire, his soul full of doubt. There was something more than desire in that bed. Something he couldn't control. And that, more than the desire itself, was what frightened him. Chapter 6. Though his heart burned within his chest, his face remained unmoved. Odyssey, Homer. Liobhan paced the room in restless circles, her lips pressed tightly together. Aurnach's chamber, at the top of the fairy tower, was supposed to be her refuge. Her advantage. But the place felt more like a prison than a home, and he was more absent than ever. She had seen little of him since her arrival. Yes, they shared a bed, but rarely the same hours. He came in late, left early. The night before, for the first time, she knew he'd been there. When she woke, she felt the cold of the empty mattress beside her, the imprint still visible on the feathers. His body had left a trace, but he, as always, had vanished. Frustration churned inside her, but it wasn't only about failed plans. Nearly a month in Dun Coran, and not a single clue about the banner of the eternal flame. She had searched discreetly but found nothing. The MacInnes clan kept its secrets well. And Aurnach. Aurnach watched her with a blend of politeness and distance that left her defenseless. The problem was that she could no longer pretend indifference. The more she came to know him, the harder it was to lie to herself. It wasn't just his strength, his fierceness, or his stature. It was his restraint. The way he commanded without raising his voice. The way he looked at the world, as if nothing could surprise him. And though she knew her nearness didn't affect him, Liobhan could feel desire growing within her, slowly, silently, like a tide. The isolation was wearing her down. The clan treated her with respect, yes, but with the same coldness as he did. She was there and yet not. An invisible wife. How could she complete her mission, if she couldn't even breach his life? She needed him to lower his guard, to trust her. She sat at the edge of the bed, twisting a lock of hair between her fingers. If she couldn't win him with her presence, she would have to use cunning. She'd start with the space they shared. The room was austere, masculine, as if he didn't allow himself more comfort than strictly necessary. Perhaps, she thought, if she could soften that space, claim a small corner of it, she might also open a crack in his world. She stood up. She would ask permission to change a few things. And then, casually, she'd mention the keys he had, curiously, forgotten to give her. They were hers by right. She was the lady of Dun Coran, even if no one seemed to remember. She didn't get far. Barely out in the corridor, a voice stopped her. "Good morning, my lady. Can I help you?" Liobhan turned. Deirdre. Always nearby. Too nearby. Yet there was a warmth in her tone that made her bearable, even comforting. She was one of the few kind presences in that place. "I'm just looking for Aurnach. I need to speak with him." "He'll be in the yard already, training." Liobhan nodded. At least she knew where to find him. Crossing the threshold of the vestibule, daylight wrapped around her with an almost violent brilliance. The air was clean, salty, full of summer. Even the sky seemed a deeper, clearer blue, and for the first time in days she took a full breath. Her heartbeat felt lighter, as if the air was clearing her thoughts too. She followed the sound of laughter, and the metallic clash of steel meeting steel. She found him there in the center of the circle, bare-chested, muscles tense and gleaming with sweat. The sun touched his skin as if he too belonged to the landscape, the sea, the stone, the laird of the clan. Aurnach was all strength, all control. But there was a grace to the way he moved that disarmed her. She stayed to the side, watching without being seen. She saw how he corrected his men, how he treated them with respect, without arrogance. In that absolute command, there was also a generosity that moved her more than she cared to admit. When his brother Cairman stepped in, the rhythm changed. The clash of swords rang in the air, vibrating in her chest. At first they seemed evenly matched, but then Aurnach smiled. "You'll force me to use my right." Liobhan startled. Had he been fighting with his left hand all along? He turned his head, as if he'd heard her. Their eyes met. It was only a moment, but it was enough for Cairman to take advantage of the distraction and strike him. "Damn it," Aurnach muttered, and his expression shifted when he saw her. "I need to speak with you," said Liobhan, approaching hesitantly. He looked at her, as if remembering her all of a sudden. And he didn't seem pleased. "I'm busy. It'll only take a moment. It's important." Cairman stepped in, with the half-smile of someone who knows more than he says. "See to your wife, brother. We're done here." Aurnach let out an audible sigh, and handed his sword to Cairman. "Come." She followed him, nearly jogging to match his pace. She watched him from behind, her gaze caught by the way his muscles shifted as he walked. He moved like a man who had never learned to doubt. They stopped atop the battlements, facing the sea. The wind brought the scent of salt and a dense silence. He didn't look at her. His eyes stayed on the horizon, on the rhythm of the waves crashing against the rocks. She brushed his shoulder with hers, unintentionally. It was barely a touch, but it sent a soft, warm jolt through her. She closed her eyes for a moment, to stop the vertigo. And then she looked too. The beauty of the place was overwhelming. The sea, an impossible blue, seemed a mirror reflecting not just light but something deeper, more elusive. Liobhan understood why he sought silence here. It was a refuge. A promise of something he wasn't yet ready to name. She drew a deep breath. She had to speak, had to ask for the keys, suggest the change. But in that moment, she didn't want to talk about keys. She wanted to know if he felt it too, even just a little. Despite the vast spectacle of the Gribben cliffs and the clouds set ablaze by the setting sun, the silence between them weighed heavily. He was waiting for her to speak, not bothering to hide it. "I'm sorry for interrupting your training. That wasn't my intention." Liobhan waited for a polite response that never came. He was watching her without blinking, as if measuring not her words but her entire presence. She lowered her gaze, uneasy, and began to shift the tip of her shoe across the loose earth. Her mother's advice came to mind: when a man won't listen, flatter him. "You're incredibly skilled with a sword. Watching you practice was fascinating. Especially when you switched hands. I didn't know that was even possible." He shrugged. A brief, indifferent gesture. "It takes practice," he said without emphasis. A wall. Not even praise could dent his hardness. "I have some experience with steel too," she added, feigning casualness. "Though I'm better with a bow." That at least seemed to draw something like surprise from him. "Are you telling the truth?" She held his gaze, chin lifted. "Of course." He looked her over, openly. "You don't look like you could hold a sword." "I'm stronger than I seem," she replied, standing straight as a taut branch. A shadow of a smile curved his lips. "And why would a lady want to wield steel?" "You'd be surprised." He shook his head, amused, like remembering something distant and ridiculous. Liobhan felt an old burn rise up. That condescension, so familiar. "Stop bothering, girl." Your brothers need to practice. Bother. Always that word. Your mother was a proper lady. You should be one too. But Liobhan hadn't wanted to be a lady at 10. She wanted to chase after her brothers, bow in hand. My father didn't approve at first, she said at last, mostly to herself. But he came to see it was wise for a woman to know how to defend herself. Or so I think. You won't need it here, Aurnach replied curtly. I'll protect you. And my men don't have time to play at being soldiers. She swallowed the retort rising on her tongue. This wasn't the moment. Not yet. I wanted to ask if it might be possible to organize a small hunting outing, she said, searching for the right tone. Something short. He crossed his arms. The tension in his muscles beneath his shirt held her gaze a second too long. No. She looked up, caught off guard. Why not? It's dangerous. I'd have an escort. I said no. His tone allowed no argument, but Liobhan didn't back down. She took a deep breath. Was there a reason you wanted to speak with me? He seemed surprised by the question. I thought you wanted to speak with me. She improvised. I'd like to make a few small changes in our chamber. Nothing major, just for comfort. I assumed I should ask permission first. She looked at him sweetly, hoping for some gesture of closeness. Nothing. I suppose you expect me to handle certain duties as lady of the castle. If you could tell me whom I should speak to. That's not necessary, he cut in. My sister Urchena takes care of that. She has for the past 2 years. Since she returned to Dun Coran. The silence that followed was heavy. Liobhan turned pale. I didn't know. I haven't had the pleasure of meeting her yet. She'll join us for dinner tonight. Owen Og will recite his poem about the clan. I'll be glad to hear him, she replied, grateful for even a crack in his wall. Do you need anything else? She hesitated. Then softly. I was hoping we could spend some time together, get to know each other a little. He looked at her, puzzled. Why? The question, so honest, hurt more than any rejection. Because we're married, she answered with a smile that didn't reach her eyes. He sighed, as if he had more pressing matters to deal with. I'm busy, Liobhan. I imagine, as the daughter of a laird, you understand I don't have time for frivolities. We dine together. That should be enough. Frivolities. Her stomach tightened. This wasn't working. She tried kindness, flattery, courtesy. Nothing seemed to reach him. On impulse, she placed her hand on his bare arm. His warmth startled her. Beneath the skin, his strength pulsed, alive, vibrant. She felt her own body respond inexplicably. I don't want to be a burden, she said sincerely. It's just, this past month I've had very little company. And this castle is so new to me. Aurnach raised an eyebrow. Do you expect me to give you a tour? I'm not a child, if that's what you mean, she answered firmly. He looked at her in silence. He wasn't mocking her this time, but he wasn't yielding either. If you truly looked at me, she added, not breaking eye contact, you'd see I stopped needing a nanny a long time ago. There it was, the flame, Aurnach thought. He had begun to believe he'd imagined it. Lately, Liobhan had been all sweetness in the face of his growing harshness, as if she were trying desperately to please him. Her compliments, which might once have amused him, now exasperated him. He hadn't meant to provoke her. But having the source of his recent torment standing before him did nothing to improve his mood. The memory of her soft, warm backside pressed against his groin still clung to his skin like a curse. And beneath his plaid, the recollection kept pulsing. Sharing a roof with her, so close, so untouchable, was driving him mad. He cursed his impulsiveness. Bringing her to his chamber had been a reckless act, sparked by the sudden fascination that seized him when he touched her in the pantry. He'd mixed desire, awkwardness, and a curiosity he didn't know how to silence. And now all of it festered into unbearable frustration. He had tried to work it out in the training yard. Useless. She reached him even there. He had seen her arrive, and for a moment he froze. The sun lit copper sparks in her hair, so vivid it hurt to look. And her green wool dress made her seem like something freshly risen from spring dew. Distracted, he took a blow from a sword for not paying attention. He had been so absorbed, even her voice was enough to undo him. Out of the corner of his eye he saw her approach, brimming with fury. Her fist clenched. Her chin defiant. She was a walking contradiction, sweet yes. But burning. Irresistible. Well, she asked. I wasn't aware your statement required a response. But if you insist, you certainly don't seem to need a nanny, at least not physically. She went pale with indignation. I only asked to spend some time together because I thought. What did you think, Liobhan? He shot back without looking at her. He wasn't as calm as he seemed. He knew she felt alone, but if he gave in to pity it would be worse for both of them. She needed to understand. If he looked at her, he'd see the hurt in those lavender-violet eyes. He couldn't do that. He couldn't want her. And yet, it was getting harder not to. There were moments when he longed to hold her, just to protect her. Just to wipe away that shadow that crossed her face when she thought no one was watching. He sighed. This was nothing more than a political arrangement. King James had ordered their union. If she hoped for romance, she would only find disappointment. This isn't a marriage like others, he said at last. Love was never part of the deal. She stiffened. What do you mean? Aurnach turned his gaze from the sea and finally looked at her. It's an alliance. Love wasn't in the pact. He pulled his arm away, avoiding contact, fully aware of how she held her breath at his coldness. But it doesn't have to be that way. My father loved my mother deeply. That threw him. It was hard to picture the battle-hardened MacRae of Fionla as a man in love. When did your mother die? My birth was difficult. She never recovered. I barely knew her. They say I look like her. The sorrow in her voice was painfully human. She had lost her mother so young, it was easy to imagine how lonely she must have felt growing up among men hard as stone. She might even blame herself for that death. What if everything was just as it seemed? A young woman, innocent, pushed into a union she hadn't chosen? And your parents, she asked. They respected each other. Lived independently. Over time, I suppose there was some affection. But not love. And you? Don't you wish for someone to love, someone to trust? I'm laird. My clan trust me. The loyalty of the MacInnes is enough. Love doesn't win battles. It doesn't settle grudges. It's a lovely ideal, nothing more. A bard can sing about it. I don't need it. He wasn't unfeeling. But his life was ruled by duty. His clan, his war with Farquhar, his position. Love complicated everything. And Liobhan, however beautiful, couldn't be part of his future. She looked at him with a mix of disappointment and astonishment. For the first time, he hesitated. Had he been wrong to judge her? She had done nothing to feed his suspicions. He watched her with the clan, her quiet dedication. Even Fergus spoke of her kindness. Perhaps Liobhan was exactly who she said she was. And he, in trying to protect her, was only wounding her. But we could try, she began. I didn't choose this alliance. I only agreed to a trial marriage, Liobhan. You know it's for a year. Of course, she murmured. But as the full meaning struck her, color drained from her face. So you intend to repudiate me? He didn't need to confirm it. She already knew. And what about, she began, blushing. We'll live as husband and wife. In every other sense. She looked down, flustered. And your needs? If she only knew. If she could feel what he felt. Even now, with her scent in the air and her body so close, he was fighting not to touch her. Wanting her wasn't the problem. It was needing her, with an intensity that bordered on torment. But aloud, he simply said, "My needs are taken care of." A lie. He hadn't been with another woman since she arrived. He only wanted her, though he refused to admit it. Only her. He glanced at her. She was stunned, wounded. Guilt pricked him. "I thought," she began, but didn't finish. Their eyes met. The tension was almost tangible. He was battling the urge to take her in his arms, to tell her no, that none of this was easy. That it wasn't for lack of desire, but because of it. He brushed her cheek with his thumb. Her skin was impossibly soft. She leaned in, seeking him, as if her body already knew what her mind still resisted. But he let his hand fall. He had to remember his purpose. Liobhan would return to her clan at the end of the year. He would seal a new alliance. Continue with his plans. She was not meant for him. "You are an exceptional woman, Liobhan. But this changes nothing. When the year ends, my duty will be fulfilled." Chapter 7. Love looks not with the eyes but with the mind, and therefore is winged Cupid painted blind. A Midsummer Night's Dream, Act 1, Scene I, Shakespeare. If beauty was, as her uncle claimed, the key to a man's heart, then Liobhan was ready to wield hers like a weapon. Even if humiliation overwhelmed her. She chose her dress carefully, not out of vanity but necessity. Dinners were her only battlefield. The rest of the day Aurnach avoided her with a cold courtesy that stung worse than outright contempt. He thought her beautiful, he'd said so, but not enough to pull him from his lover's bed. Still, maybe that dress could make him reconsider. What hurt most wasn't the rejection, but the bluntness with which he delivered it. So measured, so restrained, as if there were no cruelty in it. And yet it had left a splinter that wouldn't stop aching. The image of him with that other woman, tall, dark-haired, sculpted like an ancient statue, replayed in her mind like a bad omen. And she had offered herself. Not in words but in gestures, in a silent waiting Aurnach had ignored. He didn't want her. And accepting that hurt more than she could admit. She straightened as if pain could be expelled through posture. It was ironic. The only man she had ever tried to win over deliberately was also the only one immune to her charms. Hadn't she once wished for a man who saw beyond her beauty? Wish granted. She should focus on something else. On what truly mattered. On what he had unwittingly revealed. He meant to send her back after a year. Untouched. The thought made her smile bitterly. Not even her husband wanted her. They had both accepted the marriage, as a means to an end. He for loyalty to his king, she for far less noble reasons. But Aurnach's integrity, though unsurprising, shamed her. He was, after all, a man born to carry the weight of the world. At least she knew where she stood. She would begin where he had faltered, with desire. If she couldn't win his heart, she would confuse his body. She had spent the afternoon piecing together the remains of her resolve, shattered by that brief, devastating caress. Her cheek still burned where his sword-calloused fingers had touched it with unexpected tenderness. She'd seen something like regret in his face, just a flicker before the mask of restraint had returned. But she had seen it. That was something. Kaedra tightened the dress laces with a resigned sigh. Liobhan picked up her silver mirror and studied herself, as if trying to understand the woman reflected there. "It's not proper for a lady," the maid muttered, disapproving of the neckline with a pursed mouth. "Don't be so dramatic, Kaedra." "It's a lovely dress," Liobhan replied, though the flush on her cheeks betrayed her. The golden silk clung to her body with an almost indecent softness. The bodice, unreinforced, lifted her breasts just to the edge of decorum. No corset, no ruff, no veil. Just a fine shift beneath, and the silent promise of desire. Liobhan knew exactly what the dress suggested, and what it could provoke. She shivered, not just from shame but from anticipation. That night, she adorned herself with her mother's emeralds. Not out of vanity, but for protection. They were her only tie to a past she didn't remember, but still belonged to. A relic of another life. "Your husband won't be able to take his eyes off you," Kaedra declared after a final inspection. Liobhan didn't answer. She was thinking of what came next. Of the look he would give her. Of what she needed to provoke, and what she couldn't afford to feel. Kaedra, as always, insisted. "It's not right that he hasn't claimed you. Everyone talks." "He said he wanted to give me time," Liobhan replied barely above a whisper. "What if he doesn't intend to keep his end of the bargain?" The question hung in the air, heavy with a deeper fear than Liobhan was ready to admit. When Kaedra mentioned the rumors of a possible alliance with the MacLean, the floor seemed to tilt beneath her. Was that it? Was Aurnach promised to another? Had she ruined his plans? She forced herself to lift her head and walk to the hall. She hesitated on the threshold, suddenly aware of the dress's weight, of the stares it would draw, of how much she had laid bare. For a moment, anxiety stole her breath. But she didn't retreat. She made herself take in the room alive with laughter, voices, raised cups, stories shared. Everything she longed for and was excluded from. A stranger among them, just like in Dunstaffnage. Only here, maybe, she could still carve out a place. If she played her cards right. If she didn't fall in love. She stepped into the room, each stride a wager. It was the first time in weeks that Aurnach allowed himself something close to peace. Liobhan now understood his limits, and that eased the constant tension. The agreement between them had been silently sealed. Respect, distance, and a feigned disinterest that kept them from unnecessary friction. He was certain she preferred to stay away. Meanwhile, he clung to a quiet hope of regaining normalcy, perhaps even, why not, sleeping under the same roof again. With that comforting thought, he brought the glass to his lips, let the taste of the Uiski Bitha warm his chest, and leaned back in his chair. For the first time in days, he smiled. Barely. The sudden murmur in the room snapped him back to reality. Conversations halted as if the wind had changed direction. He looked up just as Liobhan walked in. And the world seemed to stop. There was something in her stride, chin held high, back straight, a quiet determination. She moved with a grace born not of coquetry, but of unbroken pride. But as he looked more closely, he felt something tighten inside him, hard and piercing. The fabric of the dress, a choice as deliberate as it was dangerous, hid nothing. Not from others, and worse, not from him. What he felt wasn't just desire. It was something older, more primal. An instinct he didn't fully recognize, possession, fury, a hunger that bordered on shame. He glanced around. Too many eyes fixed on her. Even Cairman had stopped pretending. His jaw clenched. For a moment, he wanted to shout. To cover her. To take her away. Not out of jealousy, not from morality. But because he wasn't ready for others to see her like this. Not when he still hadn't learned to look without trembling. When she reached him, she inclined her head slightly, a gesture that was greeting, challenge, and provocation all at once. Aurnach remained still, his face like stone, his fingers white around the glass. "Good evening," she said softly. The anger wasn't toward her, and he knew it. It was toward himself. For what he felt. For not knowing how to hold it back. Without a word, he rose. Took her arm firmly and led her out of the room. Only when the walls shielded them from others' judgment did he speak. "What in the devil's name do you think you're doing?" She held his gaze, but he noticed how her fingers clenched around her skirt. Beneath the boldness, there was something more vulnerable. Something he hadn't expected. "It's just a dress," she murmured. "Not in a room full of men," he replied, his voice low. "Not when every gaze is seeking what I'm trying not to want." His voice had lost its hardness. There was a tremor in it, as if maintaining control cost him more than he could admit. He guided her gently to his chambers, closed the door and leaned against it, as if needing to brace himself to say no more than he should. She stood in the middle of the room, stiff, expectant. "What do you intend to do?" she asked at last in a whisper. He drew a deep breath. "Nothing I'd like to," he said. He searched among the clothes and pulled out another dress, sober and elegant, in green velvet. He handed it to her without meeting her eyes. "Put this on." "I don't need a maid," she tried to protest, but her voice came out weak. "No," he replied. "Not tonight." The silence that followed was thick, almost tangible. She turned, ready to change. But the dress, intricate in its design, resisted. He stepped forward without asking, and began to undo it. His fingers, quick and skilled, worked with care. But it was impossible not to feel the charge between them. The brush of his hands on the fabric, the closeness of his breath, the pause between one knot and the next. Every gesture said more than either dared to voice. Liobhan closed her eyes. It wasn't fear she felt. It was vertigo. As if standing at the edge of something irreversible. When the dress finally gave way, it slipped from her shoulders. Aurnach stepped back, as if the contact had burned him. "A dress like that is an invitation," he said, not in anger but with a seriousness that left no room for argument. "Don't play with fire, unless you're willing to burn." She nodded, wordless. He handed her the new dress and turned his back as she changed. When she was done, without another word, he walked her out of the room. The tension still lingered between them, humming like a live wire, but something had broken or perhaps opened. A taut, invisible thread they could no longer ignore. Chapter 8. With love's light wings did I o'erperch these walls. For stony limits cannot hold love out. And what love can do that dares love attempt? Therefore thy kinsmen are no stop to me. Act 2, Scene 2, Romeo and Juliet. Shakespeare. The room held a tense silence as they entered, though faces turned discreetly. No one dared look at Liobhan directly, but everyone knew. Aurnach walked beside her with ease, as if what had transpired minutes earlier hadn't left them both breathless. He offered her a seat at his side, and resumed his meal without a word, as if he hadn't slid his fingers over her skin or held her while she trembled. He had told himself he was only trying to set boundaries. That the dress had been a deliberate provocation. That she needed to understand. But what unsettled him most was that he had understood too. Aurnach dove back into conversation with Cairman, clinging to discussions of roads and routes to Edinburgh like a man searching for safe shores. The debate grew livelier, and with it a bit of the lingering heat began to fade. It was then that Liobhan, who had remained silent, spoke in a calm voice. "Have you been at court recently, my lord?" Aurnach looked up. He appreciated her attempt at normalcy. They both seemed eager to turn the page, or at least pretend they could. "No," he said. "But I must return soon." He suppressed a grimace. He had no desire to see the king, much less to account for anything. "Oh, how I envy you," she exclaimed. That confession, spoken with a mix of longing and light in her eyes, struck his chest with a strange pang. Was it nostalgia or something more? "Did you enjoy court?" "Very much." She nodded, with the honesty of someone who had no need for embellishment. "It wasn't easy at first, but I learned to love being there." Aurnach guessed she meant leaving her family behind. He studied her more closely. "Didn't you find it exhausting? All the protocol, the ceremony?" "It wasn't," she answered, and for the first time her voice carried a different warmth. "In private, the king and queen are quite different. Human. Approachable." Her choice of words surprised him. Aurnach caught what she implied. There she had found something resembling belonging. "And were you part of that family?" She hesitated briefly, then smiled. "No, of course not," she replied lightly. "But they made me feel as if I were." Behind her smile, Aurnach glimpsed something deeper. The longing of someone who had tasted joy, only to lose it. He recognized that wound in her. It was one he knew well. Do you read much? Her eyes lit up. Yes. I'm passionate about old romances, epic songs. La Morte d'Arthur, La Chanson de Roland. And lately Shakespeare. Have you heard of him? Yes, he replied, watching her reaction. Romeo and Juliet is my favorite, she added, with a more intimate smile. Aurnach tensed. What an ironic choice, he thought. A love story poisoned by family hatred. Without thinking too much, he offered. There's a library in the fairy tower. You may borrow whatever you like. She looked at him surprised, then smiled. It was a smile so sincere, so bright, that Aurnach had to look away. He didn't want to give in to the temptation of making her happy. Not more than he already had. Liobhan felt the cold touch of solitude when Aurnach turned back to his conversation with Cairman. The illusion of closeness vanished as quickly as it had come. And then, Christiana appeared. Her presence, elegant and effortless, was a cruel reminder that Aurnach belonged to another world. One Liobhan could never access, no matter how her body had burned in his. The intimate gesture from earlier, the hands, the whisper on her skin, now felt like a performance. A correction. As if he had only meant to punish her. She turned her face away, and found a small figure emerging from the shadows. The dark patch over her face left no doubt. Urchena. She silently thanked Kaedra for preparing her for the encounter. Still, the first impression shook her. Not because of the patch, but because of what it said without words. Pain endured constant judgment. You must be Urchena, she said gently. I'm so pleased to meet you. The young woman didn't lift her eyes. Liobhan didn't hesitate. She reached out and laid her hand over hers. I never had a sister. But if I had, I'd have liked her to be like you. Urchena froze, as if the simple gesture had undone her. But a moment later, she nodded. It's a pleasure for me too, she whispered. I'm sorry I didn't attend the betrothal. I was with my sister Christina, helping her give birth. Liobhan sensed the trip had been more of an escape than a duty. She didn't blame her. Was it a girl or a boy? A girl, Urchena replied, and for the first time she smiled truly. Liobhan returned the smile. There was beauty in her, even with the patch. Her hair fell in soft waves, her features were delicate and sweet. The one visible eye held the same intense blue as Aurnach's and Cairman's. A fragile beauty, like something out of an old tale. Do you like Dun Coran? I haven't had time to explore yet, said Liobhan, her tone still gentle. But I'm curious. Urchena hesitated for a moment, then asked timidly. Is it true that court is as wonderful as they say? Even more so. And if you ever wish to go, I'd love to introduce you. The queen would welcome you with open arms, I'm sure. Urchena shifted uncomfortably. I couldn't. Not looking like this. Liobhan felt a tightness in her chest. She clasped Urchena's hands firmly. You are beautiful, Urchena. Don't let others' judgment decide your life. I've known cruelty at court, yes. But also kindness. And you deserve both, to see the world and to choose your own path. I don't know if I could bear the stares, the comments. Neither could I at first, Liobhan admitted. They mocked my accent, my Highland manners. I felt out of place, until I stopped trying to fit in and started just being myself. Urchena looked at her, confused and awed. You seem so brave. I'm not. But one becomes brave when there's no other choice. If you want to go, we'll find a way. We'll do it together. The young woman nodded, and for a moment something like hope flickered in her smile. From the far end of the table, Aurnach watched. To his right, Liobhan was talking to Urchena, and although he couldn't make out their words, the scene held his attention. At first his only intention had been to protect his sister, from the face and the name of a MacRae, which could only remind them of everything they had lost. But he had come to understand with quiet resignation that this meeting had always been inevitable. Now all he could do was watch. What he saw unraveled him. Liobhan didn't pull away or let go of Aurnach's hand when she spoke, as if the scar on her face didn't exist. There was a disarming tenderness in her gesture, a rare and precious absence of judgment. Too many had avoided Aurnach since her return, as if disfigurement were contagious or a bad omen. He couldn't blame them, old fears were stubborn. But seeing that Liobhan didn't flinch, that her kindness was so freely given, loosened a knot in his shoulders he hadn't even known was there. Aurnach was smiling. A real smile. Not forced, not sad, not a shadow of what used to be. A bright, radiant smile. Aurnach sat still. How long had it been since he'd seen that expression on his sister's face? Nearly 2 years? More. And yet here they were, the two of them, as if they'd known each other forever. "Have you told Aurnach your ideas for our chamber, Liobhan?" he asked, unable to hide his desire to be part of that bubble of closeness. "Not yet. We were talking about court," she replied, laughter still in her eyes. "Fashion and silks," he teased, casting a mocking glance at Liobhan's dress. She blushed slightly but wasn't offended. She shook her head, amused. "I only said I think Aurnach might enjoy visiting." A flicker of tension passed through his jaw. Aurnach didn't need to imagine too much to know what the court could do to someone like his sister. No, Aurnach was too delicate. Too good. And the court ruthless. He changed the subject. "My sister is essential here in Dun Coran," he said with a gentle smile. "I couldn't do without her." "But Liobhan, didn't you have something to ask her about my chambers?" She gave him a look that was part confusion, part suspicion. Then she turned to Aurnach, lowering her voice a little. "I was just thinking of making a few changes to our room," she said, putting slight emphasis on our. "Nothing major, but I'd love to hear your thoughts. We can talk later if you prefer." Aurnach, after a quick glance at her brother, nodded. "What kind of changes?" "Something cozier, cushions, hangings, soft fabrics." She gestured vaguely, as if apologizing. "Just little things." Aurnach lit up at once. There was something almost childlike in her excitement. "Aurnach's rooms are like a monk's cell. I've been trying to change that for years." "I like them simple," he muttered, crossing his arms. They both gave him the same look, amused resignation. Aurnach spoke without hesitation. "Yes, but now you have a wife. You'll have to get used to it." Aurnach blinked. Was that Aurnach challenging him? It was wonderful. Liobhan joined in with playful mischief. "What colors do you like?" asked Aurnach. "Maybe soft pink, lavender. A bit of subtle embroidery." Liobhan threw a quick glance at Aurnach, barely containing her laughter. "Something warm." For a moment, he felt completely out of place in a conversation he no longer had a say in. But there was something in that scene, the shared laughter, the ease, the life returning, that made him smile without even noticing. Aurnach thought of the bride they had once chosen for him, quiet, obedient, barely a shadow. No, she would never have made Aurnach smile. Never would have filled the room with laughter. And that unsettled him more than he cared to admit. Liobhan watched them in silence. There was a tenderness in Aurnach she hadn't expected. A steel-forged gentleness, perhaps born of past losses. That night, seeing him with his sister, she saw him fully, the warrior and the brother, the man who knew how to be strong but also how to hold. And it hurt. A pang of longing. Of absence. She had spent her whole life trying to earn a look like that from her own brothers. And Aurnach offered it so freely. Without calculation. Without conditions. The more she came to know him, the harder it became to protect herself from him. A hush swept through the hall. The night's entertainment was about to begin. An enormous old man with a beard white as frost stepped toward the fire. His plaid billowed slightly with each step. He raised his hands, furred like a bear's claws, and the hall fell silent. Aurnach MacInnes, the MacInnes Sianachi, was about to speak. "Tonight," he boomed, We shall tell how the Aurnach MacInnes came to the clan, the banner of the eternal flame. Liobhan sat upright, as if pricked. She didn't know the tale, but something deep in her warned her not to hear it. Still she didn't move. Her hands clenched in her lap were damp. She felt Aurnach's gaze, though she didn't look for it. The old man began. Forbidden love. A fey princess. A mortal young laird. A child born of a brief marriage, and a promise broken by the sound of bagpipes and a nursemaid's carelessness. Liobhan tried to listen, but the words slipped through a watery veil distorted. The princess returned to soothe her son. She left behind her shawl red and gold steeped in spells. The Aurnach MacInnes. Liobhan held her breath. Each syllable rang like an ancient bell, striking something deep and long asleep within her. The Sianichi drank solemnly, as if even that were part of the rite. When he resumed, his voice was softer, like an incantation. The banner may be used only 3 times, he said. It has already been used twice. One use remains. Only one. And then silence. The man returned to his seat like a satisfied king. Applause erupted. But Liobhan barely heard it. She remained stiff, her eyes fixed on the dancing flames. And only then did she dare to look at Aurnach. His expression was unreadable. But she knew the story had touched him. Both of them. Chapter 9. The Heart of the Black Castle. The dress was still on the floor, crumpled like a sleeping animal. Liobhan glanced at it as she gathered her hair. Perhaps in the end it had served its purpose. It hadn't provoked the reaction she had imagined from Aurnach, but it had provoked a reaction. That was enough. During dinner, something in him had loosened. The ice hadn't broken, but it had started to crack. It was the first time they'd spoken without masks. He had even joked. No less severe, but more human. With him and with his sister, she had felt something close to peace. But then, the story of the banner had dragged her back into the mud of her mission. If the Sianichi's tale was true, the banner was hidden in a locked chest, in some secret corner only Aurnach had access to. The next step was clear: get him to reveal it. Retrieve the standard. Find the secret entrance. Flee. So simple. She let out a bitter laugh. Why would he entrust her with a secret like that? He was going to send her home in 11 months. He wouldn't trust her with anything more valuable than his word. But the alternative was worse: to return empty-handed and doom her people to defeat. There was no choice, and yet what lay ahead filled her with nausea. What would Aurnach do if he discovered the betrayal? Would they hurt her? Lock her up? She didn't think so. Even in his most distant coldness, she had never sensed cruelty in him. On the contrary, his tenderness toward Urchena was strikingly clear in a man with power. Could he forgive her? Unlikely. Highland men didn't know that word. And Aurnach was proud. What she planned would wound him precisely in the place that never forgives: pride. The knot in her stomach wasn't just guilt. It was fear. Not only of punishment, but of the silence that would follow, the certainty of never seeing him again. Of losing something that hadn't even begun, but already pulsed with force. The battle inside was brutal. She wanted to leave it all behind, return to Edinburgh, forget him. But she knew she couldn't live with the guilt. Nor with the defeat. She had to go on. Draw closer. Break the barriers. She had to make him forget she was a MacRae. That night she meant to stay awake waiting for him. Even if it took hours. Even if he came from another woman's bed. None of that mattered. Not after what she had felt when he touched her. What she had felt when she touched him. Her body still remembered the brush, the warmth. She wasn't indifferent to Aurnach. And she knew he wasn't indifferent to her either. But desire couldn't triumph over duty. She went over her plan in her mind. If the banner truly was a talisman, it had to be close at hand, in some place safe but nearby. His quarters were a strong possibility. The fairy tower where he lived seemed the best place to search. Lying down, she tried to sleep. The ceiling seemed to shift with the flickering light of the candles. She tossed, unable to find a position. At last she got up, restless. She went to the window. The night was still bright beneath the moon. Not even that beauty could quiet her mind. She thought of Kairostiona and felt a jolt in her chest. It wasn't jealousy, it was something deeper, uglier. Hypocrisy, perhaps. What she planned was far worse. And yet she felt betrayed. She couldn't go on like this. She slipped on her slippers, tightened her robe, aware of how little it covered. She looked at herself disapprovingly. The fabric was too thin. Too suggestive. But staying in the room was worse. She needed distraction. She remembered Aurnach had offered her his library. She hadn't asked where it was, but it couldn't be too hard to find. She hesitated as she crossed the room. Her attire wasn't appropriate. If Aurnach saw her, it wouldn't be a scene easily explained. And yet something inside her flared. A restless part, almost reckless. Maybe it was time to push a little more. Maybe he wanted to be pushed. She opened the door cautiously. The hallway was silent. She moved lightly, one more shadow among shadows. Her skin tingled, every sound seemed amplified. It had been years since she felt that blend of fear and exhilaration. As a child, she used to sneak out of the castle to follow her brothers. No one, not even her maid, knew of her nighttime escapades. At first they caught her. Then she learned. On her last incursion she had gone armed. The time she saved Ian. She remembered the whistle of her arrow. The man's body collapsing. Then the vomit. The blood. The terrible weight of the act. That day she stopped being a child. That day she understood her games were no longer innocent. Now once more she was playing with fire. She kept descending the tower. She didn't find the library, but she did find a room. Spacious, warm, adorned with Flemish tapestries and oriental rugs. There was beauty and memory in every corner. She stepped closer to the fire, seeking a little warmth before exploring the upper floors. Then she heard the voice. "What are you doing here?" She froze. Aurnach's voice rang out like a gunshot in the stillness. She turned slowly. He was standing there, rigid, his eyes hardened by something more than anger. It was betrayal. It was distrust. And fear. The flames cast harsh shadows across his face. He was no longer the man who had laughed with her that night. He was the warrior she had feared. The leader who couldn't afford to waver. Her smile faltered and died before it could form. He wasn't looking at her the same way. He wasn't looking at her body. He was looking beyond it. As if finally he saw her for what she was. An intruder. A threat. And deep within her, a bell began to ring. My God. Did he know? Suspicion coiled inside Aurnach like a damp, rough rope, impossible to shake off. There was something about Liobhan that didn't quite fit. Something out of place, like a wrong note in a melody that seemed sweet but was out of tune. Finding her wandering the tower in the middle of the night had shaken him more than he cared to admit. He returned to his chamber dragging the weight of that unease, unable to dispel the contradictions that had haunted him from the start. At times she seemed genuine, a displaced young woman eager to find her place in a world that wasn't hers. But then there were the silences, the evasive gestures, her kinship with Farquhar, and that uncanny way she moved through the castle as if she knew its shadows better than its halls. And there was the dress. He couldn't pretend he hadn't noticed it, tight, deliberately revealing, designed, or so it now seemed, to test his restraint. Could it be that Liobhan was part of his uncle's games? That her nearness wasn't chance but strategy? He thought of it again when he found her in the corridor, firelight behind her. The glow danced across her figure, casting curves and shadows as if the castle itself were conspiring against him. She looked at him with a mix of alarm and defiance, her chin lifted like someone ready to lie, but not fully believing in her own words. "What were you doing there?" he asked, his tone unsoftened. "I couldn't sleep," she replied, voice trembling. "I was looking for the library." It was a plausible excuse. Too plausible. "And why didn't you wait for me? Or ask Deidre?" "I didn't want to disturb her. I wasn't sure if you would return." Her words disarmed him more than he wanted them to. Something in her voice, in the way she said it, touched him with unexpected sincerity. But the conflict remained. He desired her, yes. Desired her with a burning intensity he had never felt for another woman. And yet he didn't trust her. He wanted her despite that mistrust, which was worse still. She shifted, uneasy, and that's when he noticed what she was wearing, barely a thin robe that revealed too much. Every line of her body hinted through the fabric like a revelation. His pulse pounded in his temples. He looked away for a second and had to force himself not to look again. This wasn't the time. It couldn't be. But it already was. "Do you realize anyone could have seen you?" he said, his voice low and tight, as if he had to chew each word before spitting it out. She crossed her arms as if to shield herself, but the motion only emphasized the curve of her breasts beneath the cloth. He swallowed hard, trying not to give in to the desire. He tried to think. To remember why he was angry. "What were you really looking for, Liobhan?" "Nothing," she said, and for a moment her eyes were utterly honest. "I swear to you, Aurnach. I just wanted a book. I took the wrong corridor. I thought everyone was asleep." The tension eased for a second, then returned, heavier. He took her by the arms, not violently, but with the urgency of someone who needed answers and couldn't find them. "I'm not playing," he murmured. "I can't afford to be wrong about you. And yet you are. You are wrong. You've never wanted me from the beginning." Those last words whispered undid him. Rage twisted with desire. What bound him to her now wasn't just physical. It was how she unsettled him. How she pushed him beyond himself. It wasn't like with other women. There was no control, no safe distance. Only that dangerous primal pull that tore through him like a storm. He pulled her close. Felt her heat, her trembling. His hands sought her hips, his lips her throat. When he kissed her, it was with all the urgency he'd held back, as if through her mouth he could tear the truth from her. She responded. Not with resistance, but with surrender. Hesitant, clumsy, but true. Her lips parted, her body arched into his, and for a moment Aurnach stopped thinking. He only felt her skin, her scent, her quickened breath, the sweetness of her mouth. "Is this what you wanted?" he whispered against her lips, no longer sure whether he meant it in fury, in longing, or in fear. She didn't answer. But the way she looked at him cut through his chest. Then she slid her fingers to the knot of her robe, and undid it with reverent slowness. When the fabric fell, the world seemed to halt. Her beauty struck him with the force of a dangerous promise. But it wasn't her body that moved him most. It was her vulnerability. The mix of shame and desire in her gaze. The way she didn't hide. She was letting him in. To her body, yes. But also to something deeper. And that, more than anything, was what undid him. Desire roared in him, wild. But it was tenderness that won the fight. Chapter 10. Liobhan's fingers trembled as they clung to his shoulders. It wasn't just desire she felt, but a new kind of vertigo, overwhelming, consuming. As if something inside her had opened for the first time. Her body, unfamiliar with such depths until now, responded to his slightest touch with a startling, wondrous intensity. The warmth of his mouth on her skin, the firm sweep of his hands, the way her chest arched toward him as if instinctively seeking contact, it was all too much. The world had shrunk to her senses, to Aurnach's breath against her neck, the weight of his hand on her chest, the fever burning through her belly. Every stroke of his tongue was a flare that made her shiver, a wordless murmur calling her to surrender. But even in the midst of longing, something inside her hesitated. A faint awareness, like a distant echo, reminded her that this was new. That no one had ever touched her like this, urgently, as though driven by something deeper than flesh. She closed her eyes, wanting only to feel, not to think, and yet she thought. She didn't know whether to stop him. She didn't know if she wanted to. Her body knew. It arched, seeking his heat, and her hips, guided by instinct alone, pressed against the hardness pulsing between them. Desire wrapped around her like a dangerous silk ribbon. It was as if everything she'd never dared to know about herself came alive under his hands. But then, with a brief gesture, she stopped him. Her fingers closed around his wrist. Not firmly. Not decisively. Just a touch. A moment of doubt, a silent plea. He felt it. He went still, breathing hard. And in his eyes there was something more than desire. A flicker of understanding. Or maybe wounded pride. "Liobhan," he murmured, but left the sentence unfinished. He pulled away, as if the fire they had just sparked might consume them both if he didn't. He let her go with a sharp movement and stepped back. His blue eyes, still burning, looked at her, as if he couldn't decide whether to hate her or take her. Liobhan felt something precious break. Not because of the distance, but because of everything left unsaid. "This shouldn't have happened," he said at last, voice rough. She took a deep breath. She could still feel the echo of his mouth on her skin, the need throbbing between her thighs, the humiliation of having begged with her body for what she hadn't dared ask with words. "But it did," she replied softly. He shook his head. He wouldn't look at her. His hands clenched into fists. Control settling back over him like a stone wall between them. A mistake. This time his tone left no room for doubt. Liobhan lowered her gaze. With clumsy fingers she tied the strings of her nightdress. Her cheeks burned, not only with frustrated desire, but with something deeper. Shame. Confusion. The feeling that she had lost herself in a few short minutes of intimacy. Was that what he thought of her? A simple woman? A game? "Did I do something wrong?" she asked quietly, barely more than a whisper. "Do I not please you?" His reply cut her like a dagger dressed as flattery. "You please any man." She flinched, as if he'd struck her soul. Aurnach saw her reaction but didn't soften. He wasn't a man who explained himself. "You're beautiful. But that's no reason to play with fire." His words pierced her. Because she had believed, perhaps foolishly, that this had been something more. That between suspicion and duty, something new had taken root, something cleaner. A promise, even if unspoken. But no. To him she was just temptation. A body. A risk. "I'm not a man to be toyed with," he said finally, looking at her with an intensity that chilled her blood. "Remember that. For your own sake." And he left. Liobhan stood still, alone with the crackling fire, her skin still burning where he had touched her. She wrapped her arms around herself. She didn't know if she was trembling from cold, from desire, or from humiliation. Perhaps all at once. Liobhan didn't sleep well. Sleep came late and brief, surrendered only to the weight of silent tears that dampened her pillow in the dark. When she opened her eyes, the pale light of dawn was filtering through the stone, and the pain was still there, untouched, a persistent echo in her chest. It wasn't so much the rejection, though it had hurt more than she was willing to admit, but the humiliation. She had mistaken desire for something deeper. Let herself be carried away by a fleeting sense of belonging, as if she had found refuge in Aurnach's arms. How naive. One night, one moment, and she had already wanted to believe she could mean something to him. But Aurnach wasn't a man easily misled by feelings. He wanted her, yes. She had felt it, etched into her skin like a fresh scar. The intensity of his body against hers left no doubt. And yet his mistrust was just as clear. He looked at her like a threat, not a woman. He didn't trust her. And bitter as that truth was, Liobhan couldn't fully blame him. She had meant only to walk to the library, nothing more. But she wasn't innocent to how her figure, lightly dressed in a nightgown, might be perceived. She hadn't planned it, and still she had provoked it. Played with fire and got burned. She'd made the mistake of thinking that, for a moment, he might see her differently. As more than a piece on a board of alliances and revenge. She sat up slowly, her body heavy with emotion and guilt. It hurt to know she'd even considered, if only for a moment, using his desire as leverage. That wasn't the kind of woman she wanted to be. Last night hadn't been a performance. Not for her. It had been real. Raw. Her response, her surrender, the longing in her fingers when she touched him, all of it had come from a place beyond calculation or reason. And that only made it worse. She knew she had to speak to him. Not to apologize, but to explain. So he wouldn't assume the worst. So he'd understand she was just as lost, staggering through a situation that had already spun out of her control. Aurnach hadn't returned to his room. He didn't dare. He had spent the night in the private chamber beside the library, a self-imposed exile with a bottle for company. Neither the fire nor the alcohol had managed to erase the taste of Liobhan. Her sweetness still lingered on his tongue, his body burned with the memory of her moans, her trembling surrender. He had lost control, and that was unforgivable. He had known it from the moment his hands moved over her skin, and she arched against him. From the way her mouth, soft and eager, had sought his. From how close he had come to taking what wasn't his to take. But it had been she who stopped him. Her voice, barely a whisper, had struck through his mind like a bell. There was innocence in her words. And in that instant, the image of the clan, of his father, his dead brother, the weight of his responsibility had pulled him back. He splashed his face with cold water, punishing himself for his weakness. He who had sworn never to fail, who had vowed to place duty above desire. And yet, with just a brush of her skin, he had almost forgotten everything. From the window, he watched the sea stretch toward a gray-blue horizon. The waves broke in their usual rhythm, indifferent to his turmoil. As a child, he used to imagine mermaids rising from the foam, singing him extraordinary fates. Now, all he heard were the duties he could never abandon. A laird has no right to make mistakes. Or to love, if love endangers the clan. But Liobhan's eyes kept returning to him. He couldn't erase them. They weren't the eyes of a woman playing a game. There was pain, yes, but something else too. Sincerity? What if she really had just been looking for a book? The thought, sudden and disarming, unsettled him. He thought of his library. Of the Fairy Queen, the edition he had bought in London and never shared with anyone. Liobhan's face came to him with startling clarity, as he remembered a line. Her angel's face as the great eye of heaven shined bright. It wasn't just desire. There was something in her that made him want to protect her, or maybe understand her. Against all reason. He dressed without thinking, each fold of the plaid a reflection of his automatic movements. Smoothed his hair with damp hands, took a deep breath, and headed toward the library with firm steps. Better to speak sooner than later. And perhaps bring her a book. Between them perhaps a space had opened, ambiguous yet heavy with tension and broken promises. He wanted a love without cracks, without conditions. She wanted to be loved without having to betray herself. But both carried fears as old and human as time, that love could be lost with a poorly chosen word, a clumsy gesture, an unspoken truth. And yet something shifted. Not through grand declarations or vows. But in the small things, in the act of staying. Of listening. Of being imperfect. Slowly, they were learning that love wasn't always what sparkled, but what endured. What held steady when everything else fell apart. That love didn't demand an ideal version, but a real presence. In the midst of conflict, deceit, and looming threats, something unexpected might happen. they would stop trying to win each other and begin to truly see one another as they were. Maybe that was the closest thing to love. Not the kind that asked you to be someone else to deserve it, but the kind that stayed even when you were simply yourself. Chapter 11. As she wandered through the tower in search of Aurnach, Liobhan stumbled upon what she had sought in vain the night before, the library. It was a modest room, not large but with the kind of warmth that invited quiet focus. Leather-bound books filled the shelves that climbed up the tapestry-covered walls. Light streamed cleanly through the tall windows, tracing the grain of the polished wooden table at the center. The chairs around it spoke of silent meetings, of long afternoons spent among numbers and letters. Seated in one of them, back straight and brow faintly furrowed, Aurnach seemed absorbed in a difficult calculation. She didn't see Liobhan enter. She was absent-mindedly tapping her temple with the end of her quill, matching the rhythm of her thoughts. Liobhan paused in the doorway, watching with the faintest hint of a smile. "I hope I'm not interrupting," she said softly. Aurnach looked up. Her light curls, braided neatly, glinted under the morning light. The black patch covered part of her face, but the smile that appeared was open, trembling, kind. "Liobhan, what a surprise. Just what I needed. My head's about to explode from these numbers." She pushed back from the table with an expression of weariness that betrayed more than mere mathematical frustration. Ever since Geoffrey died, no one's wanted to take care of the accounts. And with St. Michael's feast approaching, I have to close this cycle before starting the next. She sighed, resignation tinging her voice. "This is by far the worst of my duties." Liobhan circled the table. There was something in the scene. The orderly papers, the open books, the young woman trying to stay on top of something that clearly overwhelmed her, that stirred a spontaneous impulse in her. "This might sound bold, but I could help you. At Queen Anne's court, I used to review the household accounts. I'm good with numbers. It's something I just see." Aurnach looked at her with genuine surprise. Then she laughed, a short relieved sound that softened her face. "Are you serious?" Aurnach's dimples flickered briefly in her cheek. "You've no idea what that would mean. James can help with the rents and Deirdre keeps track of supplies. But are you sure it's not too much for you?" "It's not." Liobhan's smile was calm, radiant, as if she suddenly felt useful in a way that mattered. Aurnach's emotion was as spontaneous as Liobhan's offer. She stood, came around the table and embraced her. Then stepped back slightly flushed. "Forgive me. I'm not usually this expressive." "You don't have to apologize." Liobhan squeezed her hands. "I always wanted a sister. Now I have one." Aurnach lowered her gaze, but her smile was pure gratitude. At that moment, Carmen appeared in the doorway. "What are you two up to?" The women stepped apart, startled, like they'd been caught conspiring. "Good morning, Carmen," said Liobhan, regaining composure. "We've reached an agreement. I'm going to help Aurnach with the accounts." He frowned, immediate concern in his expression, turning to his sister. "Are you all right? You're not pushing yourself, are you?" "Oh, come on," Aurnach replied with more firmness than he seemed to expect. "I'm not made of porcelain, Carmen." Liobhan stepped in with gentle diplomacy. "Aurnach's already handling these tasks. I'd just be supporting her. I don't see why a woman couldn't serve as seneschal, if she's already doing it in practice." Carmen didn't answer right away. His gaze moved from his sister to Liobhan, then hardened slightly. "Have you told Aurnach?" Aurnach looked down, suddenly uncomfortable. "No. You're right. I should speak to him first." Liobhan said nothing, but she understood the hesitation. Aurnach probably wouldn't want her more involved in the running of a household he planned to give back. With every step she took into that world, it would be harder for him to ignore her. Carmen, seeing the unease on his sister's face, softened. "We can wait. There's no need to mention it just yet. Not until he's less busy." He looked at Liobhan. "Until then, I don't see why you two can't work together. It was a small gesture, but full of meaning. And perhaps for that reason, Liobhan stepped forward and without overthinking it kissed his cheek gently. A sincere, grateful gesture of affection. She didn't wait for his reaction. She didn't see how Cairman stood still, surprised by the warmth of the touch. Nor how, as he turned to leave, he touched his cheek as if wanting to hold on to the moment a little longer. Aurnach heard no words as he entered the library. He only saw the gesture, Liobhan's lips brushing the corner of his brother's mouth. The impact was immediate, physical. He froze, his body tense, a dry hum filling his chest as if struck by something invisible. It took him a moment to see clearly. There was no passion or secrecy in that touch, just a quick, spontaneous graze. Still, the blow had already landed. What hurt wasn't the kiss itself, but the way it affected him. He cleared his throat. Too loudly. Liobhan turned, caught off guard. Her expression wasn't guilty, but it was vulnerable. Aurnach felt even angrier with himself for having doubted her the night before. I trust I'm not interrupting anything, he said, his voice more controlled than he felt. No, of course not, she answered quickly. No, Urchena echoed at the same time. The two women glanced at each other. They shared something, that much was clear. A decision, a secret, maybe a new understanding. Cairman didn't seem concerned. He gave Aurnach a calm, almost teasing smile. Aurnach made a silent promise to speak with him later. If you don't mind, I need to speak with Liobhan alone, he said. Neither Urchena nor Cairman protested, but he caught the slight pause before they left. When they were alone, she watched him warily. It wasn't anything, she said, before he could ask. I know. But you shouldn't kiss anyone who isn't your husband. She raised an eyebrow, as if holding back a retort, but didn't say it. Instead, she changed the subject. I was looking for you. What for? She placed a light hand on his arm. I just wanted you to know that last night, I really was searching for the library. I wasn't lying. I don't make a habit of it. He looked at her for a long moment. He believed her. He knew it with sudden certainty, and it made him smile briefly. Seems you found it at last. She smiled back. Something loosened in the air between them. Then Liobhan raised her hand and brushed a loose strand of hair from his forehead. The gesture was small, but it made him go still. He wasn't sure who was more surprised. It had come undone, she said, blushing. Aurnach looked away. His throat ached, as if something unspoken had caught there. I came to tell you I have to leave. The color drained from her face. You're leaving? For the Port Rig Fair. I meant to wait a few more days, but I can't. The real reason was heavier. A letter intercepted by Branneth. An order. A reminder. Will you be back soon? He shook his head, the motion abrupt. From there I go straight to Edinburgh. The king has summoned me. He said no more. He didn't mention the council or the new laws pressing on the lairds of the Isles, like chains disguised as courtesy. James demanded presence, obedience, submission. Aurnach intended to give him none. You're going to court, said Liobhan, her eyes shining as if she hadn't yet seen the blade hidden in the news. Unfortunately. I was just telling Urchena that maybe. I can't take you with me, he cut her off. He saw her draw back slightly, like donning invisible armor. I understand. But she didn't. And somehow that made her more real. Cairman will be in charge. She nodded without a word. He made to leave, then paused. He couldn't end it like that. The night before, her voice, her nearness, her resistance, it was all still vivid in his memory. He wanted her, yes. But he also needed her to know, needed her not to mistake his departure for indifference. He turned back. Took her face in his hands gently but firmly, forcing her to meet his eyes. Don't think, not for a second, that I didn't want you. She looked at him with a mix of surprise and something quieter, deeper. Before she could respond, Aurnach pulled her in and kissed her. It wasn't long, but it wasn't light either. It was deliberate. A seal. Something he could take with him, and leave with her. When they pulled apart, he didn't say another word. He left the room without looking back, not for lack of wanting, but because he knew that if he did, he wouldn't be able to go. Liobhan. Maybe the mistake hadn't been loving Aurnach, but believing that returned love had to be perfect. Love didn't guarantee reciprocity, but it did offer the certainty of having been true. And that, even when it hurt, was also a kind of freedom. Sometimes she felt her heart didn't understand strategy or warnings, that it kept walking toward him blindfolded. Was that weakness, or the most intimate kind of courage? She would go on loving him, even if he wasn't there. Even if he didn't seek her out. And that love, far from shaming her, made her feel alive. Vulnerable, yes. But also incorruptible. Chapter 12. I need to get out before winter shuts us in completely, Aurnach. If I don't, I'm going to lose my mind, said Liobhan, turning away from the window where the grey light barely touched the castle walls. Aurnach looked up from the book in front of her and smiled, that open smile that had started appearing more often. The shy, wary girl Liobhan had met weeks ago was now almost unrecognizable. You know what Cairman said. It's not safe to go into the woods, not after the latest MacRae movements. A glint of mischief lit her eyes. Although if you ask him, he probably won't dare say no. He seems to give you everything. Liobhan forced a laugh, uneasy with the implication. She sensed something in Cairman, a kind of steady, almost reverent tenderness that was easy to misread. And though she had no intention of encouraging it, she hadn't yet found the right moment to speak with him. She was hoping he'd work it out on his own. She stood with purpose. Fine. I'll ask him myself. I need to get out, even just to ride. I've almost forgotten how. We could hunt a little, said Aurnach with a smile that quickly faded. Her expression clouded, and she lowered her gaze to her hands. I don't know how I'll ever learn with. Liobhan cut her off with a raised brow and a firm look that made Aurnach laugh. You're worse than Caedra, she said through laughter. Of course I want to hunt. And it won't hurt to try. Liobhan wrapped an arm around her shoulders. There was something deeply moving about the way Aurnach was regaining her composure. Even the servants had noticed it. Liobhan thought maybe her presence had helped, but she knew the real strength came from Aurnach herself. Don't underestimate yourself. Sometimes courage starts with the smallest gestures. Caedra thinks I'm a lamb, Aurnach said, smiling. So did I, Liobhan replied, grinning. And both of them laughed, light and carefree, for a moment untouched by anything else. Aurnach was the first to grow serious again. We'll have to find something to distract her, she said thoughtfully. I've seen how Branneth looks at her lately. Liobhan raised her brows. Branneth? The gatekeeper? He always finds some excuse to show up near her. I'm sure there's something there. Maybe if we give them a little push. Sharp as a fox, Aurnach MacInnes, said Liobhan, amused. You see everything, don't you? Aurnach's smile turned softer. Maybe I lost an eye, but the other senses have learned to make up for it. She seemed like she wanted to say more, then hesitated. What is it? I was just thinking how different you are. You don't dance around my injury. You let me talk about it without dramatics. Before you, no one ever did that. She took Liobhan's hand. I don't know what I would have done without you. Liobhan squeezed her fingers. You would have risen anyway. You have no idea how strong you are. Then with a sigh, she closed the book in front of her. But right now I need air. I can't stand one more day within these walls. Aurnach frowned. Aurnach will be furious if he finds out. He told Cairman we weren't to leave the castle under any circumstances. Aurnach isn't here, said Liobhan, turning back to the window. And I doubt the MacRaes would risk anything with storms this close. We'll be watched, and we won't go far. It's not reckless. The bitterness she'd been carrying for weeks surfaced in her voice. Aurnach had been gone nearly 2 months, leaving her with the echo of a kiss and a deafening absence. The book he'd left, The Fairy Queen, carefully placed on her bed, seemed like a sign, a silent apology. But no letter had come. Nothing for her. Only instructions, deliveries for Cairman and Urchenna. Each day without word chipped away at her hope a little more. And still she missed him. She had spent weeks reading, managing the accounts, getting to know the MacInnes siblings. With Urchenna she'd formed an unexpected, genuine friendship, woven through shared secrets and laughter by the fire. She was the sister Liobhan had never had. "What's wrong?" Urchenna asked. "Do I have ink on my face?" "No. Just, Aurnach doesn't know how to talk to you. And you hide so well how much it hurts." Liobhan fell silent. "Aurnach cares more than he'll admit," Urchenna went on. "There's something different in his eyes when he looks at you. Something I've never seen in him before." Liobhan lowered her gaze. "He means to return me to my family. I know. The only way to end the feud is for your uncle to fall. And for that, Aurnach needs the Earl of Ardmore. Marrying his cousin would give him that support." Liobhan felt her chest tighten. "Does he love her?" "No. He barely knows her. Elspeth MacLean is kind, but she won't last. He'll intimidate her, like he does everyone. But that doesn't matter. Aurnach will do what he believes is right, even if it costs him his happiness." Liobhan already knew. The man she'd glimpsed for a moment, the one who had kissed her with urgency and warmth, was not the man he was allowed to be. He was Aurnach More. Aurnach the Great. And that title weighed more than any desire. "Are you angry with me?" Urchenna asked softly. "No. Just a little, broken maybe." The smile she offered was faint but genuine. They both returned to the table, carefully rolling up scrolls and closing books. Liobhan clung to routine. There was still much to do, even after Michaelmas, accounts, livestock, leases. All of it filled her days, but not her thoughts. She had spent too long avoiding what she had come to find. With Aurnach away, this should have been the perfect time. And yet, she found herself unable to betray them. She had arrived with a mission. Now she had doubts. She didn't know how to help her clan without harming those she had begun to care for. Maybe it was time to write to her father. She turned to Urchenna, searching for something to lighten the moment. "So? Are you sneaking out with me, or do I have to face the storm alone?" Urchenna's laughter was honest, almost radiant. "If you jump, I follow." And in that quiet bond, Liobhan knew that at least one thing she'd done since arriving at Kilchurn had been right. Chapter 13. "Liobhan, slow down or we're turning back to the castle right now." The wind tossed her hair, but she didn't stop. She leaned further over the nimble mare's back, defying Cairman's angry voice, as if speed could wipe away the weeks she'd spent shut inside somber stone walls. For 7 days, she had wrung promises from him, until he finally agreed. She wasn't going to waste this freedom. She laughed. At last she felt alive. She glanced back. Cairman, stiff in the saddle, rode close behind, with Urchenna behind him, and farther back Branneth as impassive as ever. But Cairman's expression was something else, tightly held fury that stole her smile. So much like Aurnach. Not in looks, but in that unyielding resolve. Though unlike his brother, Cairman knew how to laugh. He knew how to offer comfort. And yet, beneath his easy manner, Liobhan had sensed a deeper wound. She had understood weeks ago, when Cairman, with casual detachment, mentioned that he had already served as laird. Aurnach had been imprisoned on the king's orders, for breaking the terms of the general band. In his absence, Cairman had led the MacInnes against the MacRae. They had lost. 2 cousins had died. She remembered his expression when he told her. Guilt still haunted him. She knew this outing carried a different weight for him. Without fully stopping her horse, Liobhan let him catch up. "It's not so bad, Cairman." She smiled, though it hurt to admit she'd pushed too far. "I'm just enjoying the day." "Am I really that reckless?" "You're just as exasperating as my brother," he growled. "Couldn't you have ridden a little slower?" "I'm a good rider. Better than most men. I could prove it on that impressive pirate of yours if you'd let me." He shook his head, but there was resignation in his eyes. "I don't know why I agreed. Aurnach will kill us if he finds out." "Maybe he won't come back anytime soon," she said with rehearsed lightness. "Oh, he'll return," he replied, serious. "And when he does, you and I might wish we'd made different choices." Liobhan reached for his hand as her horse drew level with his. Grateful. He had been a loyal friend. Perhaps the only one she truly trusted. The gesture didn't last, but it was sincere. "Thank you for this. I know I dragged you into something you didn't want. I don't regret it." He looked toward Urchenna, laughing with Branneth ahead of them. "Seeing her like that, like she used to be, it's worth more than Aurnach's anger." They spent the rest of the afternoon with laughter, arrows, and bows. Urchenna, light-hearted and playful, celebrated a mediocre shot as if she'd hit the mark. Liobhan imitated Kadra's voice, and Cairman laughed freely. It was easy to forget the war, the confinement, the threats. For a little while, they were just a group of friends in the forest, under the golden autumn light. But days were short in Mull. When the shadows stretched long, Cairman sent the men ahead toward the loch. He didn't want the women exposed if the weather turned. They rode in silence until Liobhan said, "This day meant more to me than you can imagine." He nodded, with an expression that held more than gratitude. "And to me. For Urchenna. For you." Later, as the group moved deeper into the woods, the atmosphere changed. The air grew thick, and the forest sounds seemed to vanish. Branneth raised a hand. "Silence." Something was wrong. Then the arrow whistled through the air. Cairman shoved her down with brutal force. The projectile grazed the space where her head had just been. "Branneth. Get them to the pier. Now. Go." His voice was no longer the friend's, it was the warrior's, one who knew he might not survive. He slapped Liobhan's mare and she bolted. She held the reins, stunned. But she couldn't run. She couldn't leave him. She turned the horse. Cairman was fighting. Surrounded, he held his ground with fury. He'd nearly carved a path free when he saw her. His eyes were filled with reproach. Then a blow struck his back, staggering him. Another to the head brought him crashing down. He didn't move. Liobhan felt the air freeze in her lungs. She screamed, but no sound came out. She didn't think, she just moved. She leapt from the horse, ran toward him. She barely registered the men around her, until she was dragged back. Well, well, what do we have here?" a coarse voice murmured at her ear. "What a prize! A lady with fire in her blood." The man's stench made her dizzy. His touch was foul, threatening. Liobhan struggled, but it was useless. He laughed. "That one's not going to claim you anytime soon," he said, nodding toward Cairman. "And if he does, he'll regret it." "Are you with the MacRae?" The man grinned smugly. "Sharp as you are pretty." He touched her. She slapped him. The blow she received left her dazed. She felt her hair come loose. Saw the other's expressions darken. "If you touch me again, I'll kill you," she said in a low, trembling voice burning with fury. A thick silence fell. The leader looked at her. And laughed. "You'll need more than courage, girl." He leaned closer. "Who are you? Who'll pay for you?" Liobhan swallowed. She knew it could all end here. But she wouldn't beg. Not for herself. Only for Cairman. Liobhan hesitated. The silence between them stretched tight like a drawn cord. Would the truth save her, or only drag her down further? The answer didn't come in time. With a sharp motion, The man grabbed her hair and yanked her head back. His breath sour like stale beer, mixed with the stench of sweat as he pressed her against his body. With a savage tug, he tore open her bodice. Thick, filthy fingers slipped beneath the fabric and closed around her breast. Jagged nails scratched her skin. A wave of nausea surged from her stomach. Her throat clenched. She was a heartbeat away from vomiting. "Your name? Or do you need more incentive?" "Liobhan," she whispered, her voice shaking but unbroken. "Who'll come for you?" "Aurnach MacInnes. I'm his wife." She lifted her chin. Her voice was faint, yes, but laced with a stubborn dignity, as if she could still claim a shred of control. The man stepped back, startled. He released her with sudden force, as if burned. Liobhan saw the thoughts shifting behind his eyes. MacInnes was not a man one provoked lightly. Stealing his cattle was one thing. Touching his wife was another. It was a declaration of war that wouldn't end until someone was dead. But the MacRae man shook his head. "You lie," he said, his voice thick with scorn. "No laird would let his wife ride these woods with so little protection." He twisted a lock of her hair around his fingers. "Maybe you're his whore. Or just a liar. Either way, you're alone." The tension curdled into disgust as his mouth, wet and reeking, crashed against hers. Liobhan fought back, but it was useless. He threw her to the ground with animal force and came down on top of her, all weight and filth and violence. The earth was cold, but he burned. His beard scraped her skin as he forced the kiss on her. For a moment, she wished it would all end. That her body would vanish. But something deep inside resisted. The will to live returned with a fury. She kicked, scratched. Felt him seize her wrists, felt her skirt give way under his pulling. Panic turned into muffled screams. The laughter of other men buzzed in the background, grotesque and distant, like a nightmare echoing. When she felt his hand moving down, trying to part her legs, a wave of absolute cold surged through her. Her mind shattered into 1,000 pieces. This isn't real. It can't be real. Then she heard a voice. Not hers. Not his. Cairman. Shouting. Then a blow. His voice was cut off. Liobhan's body went taut like a snapped string. She bit down with all her strength. Tasted blood, metallic and hot. The man howled. "Bitch!" The first blow knocked the breath from her. The second made stars explode behind her eyes. Then the third. The whole world collapsed into a pulse of pain. She couldn't take any more. "Please God, no." A scream, torn from her own throat, rose like a prayer hurled into the abyss. And then silence. Then a whistle. Sharp. Lethal. The weight on her body went still. The man's eyes, wide open, saw nothing. The stink of sweat and filth lingered, but his breath had stopped. His body collapsed fully on top of her. Liobhan didn't know how much time passed before they pulled him off. Only that suddenly she could breathe. Still dizzy from the blows, she cracked her eyes open. The world spun. Voices blurred with the clanging of steel. Swords. Clashes. Screams of death. Then arms wrapped around her. Strong. Alive. They pulled her close with desperate urgency. Aurnach. His face pressed into her hair, his lips at her crown. He held her tightly, as if that embrace could shield her from everything that had just happened. Liobhan felt his heart pounding hard beneath his chest. And his familiar scent, dry wood and open air. She looked up. Their eyes met. Aurnach stared at her as if the world had collapsed, and she was the only thing left holding it together. She had never seen fear on his face. Until now. But it wasn't for him. It was for her. Aurnach felt the fear like a burning brand buried in his gut. An ancient, visceral terror that froze him for an instant at the thought he'd arrived too late. His heart pounded with fury. He knelt beside her. With trembling fingers he brushed her bruised cheek. "Thank God," he murmured. He gently lifted her chin, searching her eyes. "Liobhan. Can you hear me? Are you all right?" Her eyes, the ones that haunted him on every lonely night, looked at him without fully recognizing him. They had that fragile sheen fear leaves behind after trauma. Her face, so beautiful to him, was marked. Cuts on her forehead, a bruise on her jaw, skin pale and brittle. Her hair was tangled, matted with sweat and blood. And still, she had never seemed more alive. Liobhan's gaze finally focused. She looked at him, as if waking from a nightmare. Aurnach. Is it really you? Her voice was barely a breath. She raised a hand and touched his face, as if needing to feel what was real. You're really here. She clung to him, trembling. Yes, he said, holding her tightly. I'm here. I'll explain everything later. Right now we have to get you out of here. She nodded, calmer now that she felt his warmth. But as soon as she took a step, the memory caught up with her. Cairman, she whispered. Panic surged back. Oh God, Aurnach, what about Cairman? Aurnach pulled her against his chest and covered her face with his hand, shielding her from the scene around them. She didn't need to see the blood, the broken bodies. Not now. He's alive. Douglas is taking him to the landing. He's hurt, but he'll recover. It was true. But Aurnach still felt the echo of the rage that had seized him when he arrived. The ground covered in red-stained leaves, his brother's still body, and her trapped beneath that bastard. The memory still burned in his muscles. It was all my fault, Liobhan whispered, tears soaking his neck. I never thought. Shush. Enough, he interrupted gently, stroking her hair. His voice was low, steady, protective. Not now. Not here. He wanted to kiss her. To claim her, to comfort her, to imprint the certainty on her skin that she was still his. But he knew it was too soon. Too raw. Until she surprised him. She took him by the shoulders and lifted her face. Please, she whispered. That man. Her eyes, terrified, searched for shelter. Please, Aurnach. Kiss me. His heart gave a jolt. Aye, lass. It'll be my pleasure. And it was. Their kiss wasn't born of passion but of need. It was tender, slow. An ancient sacred language. The first touch was no more than a whisper. The second, a promise. Aurnach held her with reverent care, as if kissing her might also heal her. When they parted, she said nothing. Her eyes were wet. And for the first time they weren't tears of fear. Gently, he lifted her onto his horse. He wrapped her torn body in his own plaid, cradling her with the care one gives a newborn. He mounted behind her and encircled her with his arms, securing her against his chest. Liobhan didn't protest. She felt no shame. Only relief. The horse galloped through the forest, heedless of the double weight. The wind played with Liobhan's hair just as it had hours earlier, though now everything felt as if it had happened in another life. Her exhausted body slowly surrendered to the rhythm of the ride, finding refuge in the steady warmth of the man holding her. The chainmail brushing her back was a comforting touch. Then, as if she just remembered something important, she murmured, "Thank you for the book. It's wonderful." Aurnach smiled near her ear. "My pleasure," he replied in that low voice that sank into her bones. She closed her eyes. The sound of hooves. Aurnach's warm breath on her neck. The heat. The safety. And at last the sweet darkness of sleep.